Were you hired by Dan Broderick at some point to essentially manage his house and help with the children?
Yes.
Do you recall approximately when it was that you were hired by Mr. Broderick?
Summer of 1987.
And for about how long did you work for him?
I believe I worked for him full-time for around 6 months, and then on part-time on until his death.
Can you hear? Maybe speak up just a little bit if you can.
All right, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Are you a little bit nervous
I'm
about this?
extremely nervous.
Okay. Can you describe for us, you indicated that you were first hired on a full-time basis. Can you describe for us what your duties were?
I did the grocery shopping. I did the evening cooking, the laundry, kept the house organized and clean, and took care of the children when they came home from school until their father came home in the evening.
And were all four of the Broderick children living there with Mr. Broderick at the time that you were working there?
Yes.
And when you say you worked full-time, what hours were you working?
During the summertime, the hours were from 10 to 6, and it was Monday through Friday. And during school, it was noon to 8, Monday through Friday.
Did you ever work on weekends occasionally?
If Dan were out of town, had business or vacation, and the boys weren't with Mrs. Broderick, then I would come and stay with them.
And you indicated that after you stopped working full-time after a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know who it was that took over as Mr. Broderick's housekeeper?
It was my mother.
Okay. And you continued to work occasionally or periodically for Mr. Broderick to take care of the kids?
Yes.
About how often would that happen?
It happened whenever my mother needed a day off or was ill, whenever Dan was going to be out of town on business or vacation, anything like that, I would substitute.
For example, when Dan and Linda went on their honeymoon, did you babysit during that period of
Yes,
time?
I did.
And do you recall when the last time was prior to Dan and Linda's death?
The last time I stayed was in October. I believe that Dan and Linda had gone to the Notre Dame game back east.
So that was a couple of weeks before they were killed. Is that correct?
Yes.
While you were working for Mr. Broderick and there at the house, I take it that you got to know the kids fairly well.
Yes.
Did you also get to know the defendant in this case, Elizabeth Broderick?
I got to know her.
Can you describe, for example, how well you got to know her, how often you talked to her?
I don't think of us as friends, but she was very friendly to me, and I was very friendly and polite to her. She called a lot to talk to her kids, and if they weren't there and I answered the phone, we would talk. And whenever she picked up or dropped off the children, we would communicate.
You indicated that she was very friendly with you. Was there a change in her treatment of you at all, or was that throughout?
For the majority of our relationship, we were very amicable toward each other.
When you would have conversations with Mrs. Broderick, did she ever talk to you about her feelings about Dan and Linda?
Yes.
Can you describe, would that be occasionally, often, all the time?
Most of the time.
Would those conversations, would they be something that you had generated or something that?
No, it was a subject that she would bring up.
Okay. And was it a subject that you particularly wanted to talk about?
No.
Okay. If you attempted to not talk about it, was it difficult to change the subject?
Yes.
Okay. How would you describe the nature of her interest in Dan and Linda or in talking about them to you?
She had a lot of hate for her former husband, and mostly that's what she would talk about. How much she hated him, things that had gone on between them in the past, things that were going on between them in the present, that type of thing.
Okay. When you indicate that she had a lot of hate for Mr. Broderick, how did you know that? What would she say?
That's what she said. A lot of hatred for him, a lot of name calling, a lot of threats.
Okay.
fairly aggressive or violent language.
When she would express her opinions about Mr. Broderick, did she also talk about her feelings for Linda Broderick?
Not as often, but sometimes.
And what would she say about Linda?
Same thing, how much she hated her, how much she disliked her and resented her.
Did she ever use particular words to describe Linda?
Yes.
Can you tell us what those were?
She referred to her regularly as the cunt or the office cunt or the bitch.
Okay. And how about Dan?
She called Dan bastard, fucker. Those are the two most common, I would say.
Okay. Now, was it when she talked about Dan and Linda, was it easy to get her onto other subjects?
No.
Okay. When she would talk about them, was it always as you described, with respect to her hate for them? Did she ever say nice things about them, for example?
No, never.
And how did it make you feel to be part of these conversations?
Your Honor, objection is irrelevant.
Sustained.
Well, did you ever let Mrs. Broderick know how you felt or whether or not you wanted to engage in talking about Dan and Linda?
I didn't want to say anything that would make her more upset or angry. And I also didn't want to say anything that would cause her to be upset or mad at me. I tried to just let the conversation run its course and then end the conversation and hang up.
Now, you indicated that in these conversations that she would make threats.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that? What kind of threats?
I'd have to think for a minute. She did refer regularly to the idea of killing Dan. Sometimes I thought it was metaphorically, other times it sounded more literal.
Okay. When you say she would refer to the idea of killing Dan, what would she say?
She was going to kill him.
Okay. So she would make that direct statement.
Yes.
And was that uncommon or?
No, it was common.
Okay. When she talked about wanting to kill him, how would you describe her demeanor? How did she seem?
Usually it was if she was particularly upset about something that had been going on between them, either in court or involving money or the kids. And she would basically explain the situation in a very animated way and say, I can't take much more of this. I'm just going to kill him. And it would be in that context.
Would it be in the context of being angry, or was she depressed, like I can't?
No, it was always very, very aggressive, very angry, very upset, very animated.
Okay. Oh, did well, strike that. Let me ask you what you indicated. Some of the things that she was appeared to be upset about. What was her? Did she have a major complaint as far as you were concerned?
The major complaint was financial, I would say.
Money?
Yes.
And how would she describe her financial situation?
She oftentimes told me that she was, financially in trouble or didn't have enough money to make ends meet, and that Dan was living a lavish lifestyle.
Did she ever complain about being broke?
Yes.
Did she ever, just from what you observed, did she appear to be broke or without money or finances?
Not that I would know.
In any of these conversations when she was angry or talking about killing Dan or Linda, did you ever talk to her about moving on with her life?
Only one time that I remember. As I said, for the most part, I liked Mrs. Broderick. I did. I thought she was very witty and very intelligent, and she could be very nice. And one time when she seemed particularly upset about something, I did ask her, didn't she think it was possible that she would fall in love again and go on to be happy?
And what was her response to that?
Her response to that was that she wasn't really in love with Dan, that it was her relationship with him was based on their similar family backgrounds, the fact that he would be successful and be a good provider, and they had very similar goals in their life. She described it more like a partnership.
Did she indicate whether or not she had ever been in love with Dan Broderick?
She didn't indicate that she had ever been.
Did she indicate she never had been?
Yes.
And did she tell you why she had married him?
She didn't go into it a lot, but just the things I just said, that she felt he would be successful. They had a lot of similar goals. Their families were the same. And they had, that was basically it.
Did she ever talk about how she had helped make him what he was?
No objection.
Sustained.
Did she ever talk about anything with respect to her contribution to him as a success?
Yes.
What would
She
she say?
said that she had basically taught Dan how to dress in a more professional way and had decorated his office and had joined the appropriate ladies' clubs and helped him become the person that he was at the present time.
How did she talk about that? I mean, you're talking about it kind of calmly. Did she talk about it bitterly?
No,
or-
she was very bitter about it.
Okay. Did she ever express to you something like emotional loss as far as the relationship was concerned?
She never talked about like being lonely or missing Dan as a partner or a companion. It was always in terms of the losing the lifestyle or the money or the events that Dan had attended and the prestige that he had gained as an attorney. It was a material loss, always.
Now, you indicated that she used some language when she would talk about Dan and Linda. Would she? Did you ever hear her use that language in front of the children?
Yes, I did.
Did you ever talk to her about not doing that?
Yes, I did.
And what was her response?
She basically never responded a lot to the things I, said or requested, but I knew that her language was a big barrier between her and Dan.
Objection. All conclusion, speculation.
Sustained.
Did you make requests? Did you ask if she would stop using that kind of language around the kids?
Yes, so they could continue to see her.
And did she ever do that? Did she stop using that kind of language?
No, she didn't.
Would you ever hear the boys having phone conversations with their mother?
Sometimes,
Were any of those conversations upsetting to the boys?
yes, they were.
Did you ever stop any of those conversations for that reason?
Yes, I did.
Okay, what would you do?
I would tell them that they had to hang up right then.
Why would you do that?
If I heard Rhett or Danny saying to
Your
the,
Honor, objection falls to hearsay.
Well, foundational overrule. Go ahead.
if I heard Rhett and Danny, if they sounded like they were getting upset or they asked their mother not to use that kind of language or talk that way, I would ask them, what is she saying? They would tell me, and that would be the end of the conversation.
Do you recall ever overhearing a specific conversation between Rhett and his mother in relation to Thanksgiving?
Yes.
Can you describe what Elizabeth Broderick was saying to Rhett about Thanksgiving?
Rhett was on one phone in the house. I was on another. I picked up the phone to make a call. I didn't realize he was speaking to her. They were talking about Thanksgiving, and the boys, or all the children maybe, were going to be spending Thanksgiving with Mr. Broderick that year. And Mrs. Broderick was instructing Rhett to spit out the food and to gag on it and choke and say that it was disgusting and awful and he didn't want to eat it.
She was directing him to do that in relation to Thanksgiving dinner.
Yes,
And was that in relation to Linda at all, that Linda was cooking?
Linda was cooking dinner at the house that year.
And what was Rhett's response to that?
At first he was very resistant and upset, and he was afraid, obviously, that he would get in trouble. But as the conversation continued on a bit, he sort of halfway agreed that he would do it.
Did you ever hear the boys call Linda vulgar names?
They referred to her in vulgar terms when I first came to work there.
What did you say anything about that to them?
No objections are relevant.
Sustained.
Did they ever say to you why they were doing that?
No objection, hearsay.
Sustained.
Did you ever overhear them making the statement about why they felt they could call Linda those names?
Objection, hearsay, comment.
Sustained.
Did you ever hear the defendant encouraging the boys to run away?
One time I know they ran away. I didn't hear her encourage them to do that. I was told she encouraged them to do that.
Objection, hearsay.
Sustained. Extra stricken.
Was there an incident where she came to the house and dropped off Rhett and Danny wasn't there and Rhett was
Yes.
upset?
Rhett was very upset.
Can you describe what happened?
Rhett was very upset. Danny was not being dropped off as he should have been. I asked him why he was crying, why he was upset.
Your Honor, objection, hearsay.
I would offer this as a spontaneous declaration, Your Honor.
Overruled. Go ahead.
Rhett said that their mother had told them to run away so she didn't have to return them home, and Danny did it, and Rhett was afraid to do it. So he was brought back, and Danny was missing.
At this time, was Rhett crying?
Yes,
And did you hear anything that his mother was saying to him as she dropped him off?
she was yelling at him from the car window. I did hear her say, she said, I honestly don't remember exactly what she said. I caught the word bastard, and I believed that she was referring to Dan, but she wasn't. She was referring to Rhett.
Your Honor, objection. Motion to strike.
False speculation.
What makes you believe?
Sustained. Answer stricken.
What makes you believe she was referring to Rhett?
Rhett told me she was referring to.
Your Honor, objection, hearsay.
Sustained.
May we be heard at sidebar about this?
No, you're winning the objection. Nothing to be heard on.
Your Honor, the district attorney is trying to get material that she knows she can't get in front of the jury.
I disagree with that, Your Honor.
Just go ahead. Ask another question.
Did, in your conversations with Elizabeth Broderick, did she ever express interest in Dan and Linda's lives and what they were doing?
Sometimes
What sorts of things did she want to know?
she wanted to know where they were going, what they were doing, if they were, what restaurants they would be going to, things like that.
And would she ask you these questions?
Sometimes.
Did you feel comfortable giving that information?
No, I didn't.
Was there a period of time you recall where she seemed to get even more inquisitive about what was going on with them?
After they got married, she seemed to be a little more inquisitive when I was there.
About the things that they were doing?
Just events that were going on in their life, what they did, where they went, things like that.
Were the conversations that you had with her when she was expressing her hate or expressing her desire to kill someone? I mean, were these conversations that you have with a lot of other people, or were they unique?
They were unique.
Okay. Have you ever had an experience with someone else like this?
No objection, irrelevant.
It's overruled. You can answer that just yes or no.
No.
Were you aware of any instances when the defendant came into Dan and Linda's home when she wasn't supposed to be there?
Yes.
Can you describe any of those?
One event in particular was Dan and Linda had left to go on their honeymoon, and Mrs. Broderick, came by the house. I don't remember at this time why she was coming by, but she did come by. I was upstairs. Linda's wedding dress was in the living room, and there was an envelope on top of it. It was addressed to a friend of Linda's. And after Mrs. Broderick left, I realized that the envelope had been ripped open, the contents had been dumped out, and the letter had been read.
Okay. And this was on top of Linda's wedding dress?
Yeah, I believe so.
Did you ever do anything or say anything to her about that?
That time I called her. I wanted to talk to her about coming in the house when she wasn't supposed to, and she wasn't home. And I left her a message on her answering machine in regard to entering the house when she wasn't supposed to.
Was there a time before the wedding where you were aware of where the wedding list was in the house?
Yes.
Okay. Can you describe, was this a wedding list that Dan and Linda had put together for their guests?
Yes, it was.
And where was it in the house?
On
No
Dan.
objection, this is hearsay and speculation.
Overruled. Do you know where it was in the house?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
It was on the desk of Dan's office.
You saw it there yourself.
Yes, I did.
And was that the day that the wedding list disappeared?
Yes.
When was Elizabeth Broderick over at the house that day?
She came to pick up her sons.
And did she leave the house?
Yes.
Okay. And the last time you saw the wedding list, it was on the desk in Dan's office.
Yes, it was.
Were there times that you were aware of when the defendant would not follow through with her plans with the boys?
Yes.
Can you describe that?
Sometimes when she was supposed to have them for the weekend, she wouldn't come pick them up at the last minute. That was the main thing that occurred.
Did you ever hear her explaining to the boys why she couldn't have them, whose fault it was?
She said she didn't have money to buy groceries to feed them.
Okay. And did she describe whose fault it was that she didn't have money?
She blamed it on Dan.
By the way, when the kids would come home from school, you were there working, is that correct?
Yes.
And then you would stay until
After dinner.
Okay.
7:30 or 8 o'clock.
Would you be there during the dinner hour?
Yes.
Okay. Would you eat dinner with the family as well, or they would sit and eat dinner?
No, I didn't eat dinner with the family. I was invited to, but I didn't want to. Usually they were in the dining room and I was in the kitchen. I was finishing up things I had to do before I went home.
Okay. Did they generally eat as a family? Would Mr. Broderick come home?
Almost every night.
And did you, in all the time that you were working for Mr. Broderick, did you ever see Mr. Broderick be physically abusive to any of his kids?
Never.
Did any of his children ever appear to be afraid of Mr. Broderick from what you observed?
No, not at all.
Was there ever any lack of food for the children in the house, as far as you
No,
were
there
aware?
wasn't.
Was that part of your responsibility?
Yes, it was.
Did you ever see Mr. Broderick discipline any of the kids if they got into trouble?
Yes,
And what was his method of discipline?
verbal. He'd take whoever was in trouble into his office. They generally have a long talk. Sometimes he would take privileges away, like television or videos or going to the arcade after school, something like that.
Did you see Mr. Broderick spending time with the kids or the boys? When he came home, would he spend time with them?
Yeah, yes, he would. He'd ask them how school was, what they were up to. They had things they wanted to show him or talk to him about. Yeah.
Did, in any of your conversations with Elizabeth Broderick, you indicated that her conversations were aggressive. That was your word. Is that correct?
Yes.
What do you mean by aggressive?
She was very hostile. She was very angry. She wasn't afraid or desperate. You know, she was very forthright in her exclamations of her emotions and feelings.
Did she ever express any physical fear of Dan or Linda Broderick?
Never to me, no.
Okay. Did it ever appear to be afraid of them, physically afraid of them?
No,
Did she ever appear to be intimidated by people?
not that I ever saw.
Do you recall that there was ever any change in tenor of the conversations, or was it consistent for the entire time that you knew her?
It was consistent for the entire time that I knew her.
Did you indicated that you didn't know her? You didn't feel you knew her as a friend, for example. Were you on a first name basis? Did you call her Betty, for example, or did you call her Mrs. Broderick?
I called her Betty.
Okay. The last time you babysitted, you indicated it was sometime in October when right before the boys went to the Notre Dame game. Is that
Right.
okay? Do you recall having a conversation with Elizabeth Broderick during that time?
Yes.
Okay. And what do you recall about that conversation? What was she talking about?
She said, we talked about some light chit-chat things. Then she said that she was going back to court to try to retain custody of Rhett and Danny, or to court again to try and retain custody of Rhett and Danny.
And did you say anything to her about your understanding?
I told her I thought that all the court stuff had been settled. I mean, I had just heard that. And I said, I thought that was all decided and taken care of.
Okay. With respect to custody, had you talked to Dan or Linda about whether he was giving custody to her?
Not at that time.
Okay. Did she say anything about Dan and Linda or what she wanted to do as far as Dan and Linda were concerned in that conversation?
Well, when I said I thought that the court situation was all settled and behind them, she said that she was sure that Dan and Linda would like her to just go away and leave them alone and let them live in peace. But that wasn't going to happen. And she said that she was going to continue to make Dan miserable and make his life a living hell or kill him.
Okay.
That was the last time I spoke to her.
Now, when she said that, when she said she was going to make his life a living hell or kill him, was that said lightly, seriously? What was your impression of how she said it?
Very seriously.
Okay. Did you do anything about that when she said it? Did you talk to anybody about it?
I talked to my mother about it.
Okay. Did you have some concerns about the
Yes,
manner in which she said that?
Yes, I did.
I have no further questions.
Vice Chairman?
Mrs. Broderick, when she talked to you about Dan and when she talked to you about her relationship with Dan and Linda, with Dan before their split up, she talked to you about the arrangement they had, or at least what her understanding was. Is that correct?
Yes.
About being a partnership, working towards things together, complementing each other?
Right.
Okay. And you didn't know the history of the two of them, did you?
I didn't know them when they were together. No.
Okay. So you didn't know whether anything had happened to Elizabeth Broderick that would make her feel betrayed by Mr. Broderick or anything else?
Can you reword the question?
Okay. You didn't know of the history of, for instance, whether Mr. Broderick had done anything that made Elizabeth Broderick feel betrayed, did you?
No.
You didn't know if there was any reason behind her feeling of having some difficulty accepting love with somebody because of things that had happened to him in the past, did you?
That's a long question, Mr. Early.
Well, have you ever had a friend before who while they were in love with somebody?
I'm going to object to a question like that.
When you gave some answers about the way Elizabeth Broderick appeared to feel towards Mr. Broderick, that it was money only.
Objection, Your Honor. She testified as to what the defendant said.
Sustained.
Did the defendant tell you that Mr. Broderick had been betraying her for 2 years?
Objection, Your Honor. Seems facts not in evidence.
Rules match that. She ever tell you anything like that?
Did she ever tell me that? Please say again.
Did Mrs. Broderick, when she had these conversations with you, tell you that Mr. Broderick had cheated on her and had an affair with Linda Broderick for a number of years?
She never told me that.
And now she would tell you, you would talk to her on a weekly basis,
Pretty regularly,
almost every day?
almost every day.
Okay, and it was almost every day that she would express this anger, is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
In almost every conversation.
Yes.
And it didn't take very long before the conversation turned to her dislike for Dan and Linda.
Sometimes it didn't happen right away.
Okay, but most of the time it did.
A lot of the time it did.
Okay, and even when it didn't happen immediately, it wasn't very long, was it, before it turned to using bad language and talking about Dan and Linda in terms of how much she disliked them?
Yes.
Okay. And do you remember, was there ever a conversation where that didn't come up? Was it pretty much almost every single conversation?
No, there were conversations when it didn't come up.
A few of them.
They weren't the majority by any means.
But this was a woman that you still found that you liked and felt close to somehow.
And I wouldn't say I felt close to her, sir.
But you liked her.
Yes?
You and her had arguments, didn't you?
No.
She never told you that she didn't like someone of your age watching her children, telling her what she could do and not do?
Say again? Someone of my age doing what?
Telling her what she could do with her children and what she couldn't do?
I never told Mrs. Broderick what she could or couldn't do.
Well,
And
did you?
we never did have an argument of that nature. No.
Did she ever get angry at you and make fun of the way you looked?
Not to my face or to my knowledge.
You were wearing a ring in your nose at the time you worked there, weren't you?
Okay, I didn't work for Dan at the time, and it was a diamond stud. And I wasn't caring for children when I did that.
There was never any argument about, did you ever do that did you ever wear that in front of Elizabeth Broderick?
I believe she saw it, yes.
Okay. And was that away from the home?
No, it was in the home.
Okay. And the children the reason you were in the home was to care for the children, wasn't it?
On a substitute basis.
Okay. And was there any arguments where she would be upset about either your condition or what she felt was going on in the house?
You need to explain what you mean by my condition.
Did she feel that was there any arguments where she felt you were being inappropriate in the way that you dressed or looked around the children?
Mr. Early, every conversation I had with Mrs. Broderick, if we weren't talking about Dan and Linda, was friendly, polite, and respectful. She never demeaned or degraded or humiliated me to my face about anything, and I never did to her.
Did you remember testifying at the last trial that there was a time that you accused her of trying to get you fired?
Objection, that misstates the evidence.
The same.
Was there any time that you got angry at Elizabeth Broderick and accused her of trying to get you fired?
That's a two-part question. Can I answer two-part?
Oh, okay. Was there any time you got angry at Was there any time that you got angry at Elizabeth Broderick in regards to trying to get you fired?
I can't answer it that way. Can I answer it in two parts?
Was there any time where she tried to get you fired?
No.
Did you ever accuse her of trying to get you fired?
May I elaborate?
Did you, yes or no? Did you ever accuse her of trying to get you fired?
No.
I'll refer to the trial transcript, page 446, Your Honor. I believe this is October, this may be October 25th. Page 446, line 28 through 2 of the next page, 447.
She'll let it read it herself.
Where do you want me to start?
Right here. I'll read the question on the next page and the answer.
You're not going to object to any attempted impeachment. This was the same compound question that was asked previously that the witness had trouble with.
If she had trouble with it, the district attorney can go over that. I asked the question, she answered.
Oh, okay. You're way down here. About animosity and battles.
Did you read that question?
Yeah, but I don't think it's the one you're referring to.
You read the question, start line 28, read that question, and your answer on line 2.
That wasn't the question you just showed me.
Did you have an opportunity to read that?
Yes, I did.
When you were asked do you remember being asked the question, was there any time you got angry at Elizabeth Broderick, accused her of trying to get you fired, you answered yes?
Yes, according to that, I did.
Okay, and what is your, and did that ever happen?
I got angry at Elizabeth Broderick I did not accuse her of trying to get me fired. I don't believe that's what she was trying to do.
And did you get angry at Elizabeth Broderick for anything she did to you?
Can you be specific?
Was there anything that she did to you that made you angry at all?
Ever, anytime? Or in regard to this specific event?
In regards to when you were working there, is there anything that she did to you specifically?
No, never.
Now, you started there in 1987,
Yes.
and do you remember when you started?
Summertime of 1987.
And do you remember the month at all?
No, sir, I don't.
Do you remember the boys being out of town?
Yes, they were in Colorado.
Have a moment.
Certainly.
So you would have started working there before they went to Colorado?
No, when I started, they were there. So
They-
summertime.
And it was after they got back from Colorado?
No, I was hired and started taking care of the house while they were gone.
Okay, so it was while they were gone that you were working there.
Yes.
And you remember that you worked there for about how long?
I know it wasn't a year. It was till the holiday season, right before the holiday season of that same year.
Well, do you remember testifying that it was for about a year?
I said it was approximately a year, and at the time, that's what I thought. I'm mistaken. It wasn't a year.
So your testimony now is that it was about 6 months.
6 to 8.
And during the, you had an interview with the district attorney's office, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and did you have an opportunity to read your interview with the district attorney's office?
Before this case?
Yes.
Reread my testimony?
Well, did you have an opportunity to reread your interview?
Oh, my, deposition. Yes.
Okay. And when you first talked to the district attorney, you didn't bring up the incident in October where she said she'll see him dead first, did you?
That she was gonna make him miserable or kill him? That? I don't recall.
Do you remember a supplemental interview with the district attorney?
I know we talked more than once.
Okay. Did you look at the interview? Your first interview was December 12th. Is that correct?
I don't know.
It was shortly after the killing. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And I may be missing it. If you could just show me here. If you could review that and see if it was in that interview.
I thought she testified she didn't say that.
I wasn't sure if she said she didn't say it or didn't know. I'll ask her again. Do you know whether it was in that first interview that you mentioned that?
I don't recall. I really don't remember. It doesn't appear in here.
You remember reading a subsequent interview where that was mentioned? sometime in June.
So in June.
You could. It's nothing. Yeah, just nothing. You could review this report.
Okay. Yes.
Was that the interview where that was mentioned?
Yes, it is.
Does that refresh your memory?
Yes, it does.
Is there a date on there, Mr.
Yes, June 5th, Your Honor,
90?
of 1990, yes.
Thank you.
Now, your hours were in the summer, 10 to 6,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
and was pretty much the household up when by the time you got there?
Everybody up and moving around? Yes.
Okay, so you don't know what went on before then, do you?
No.
And you would leave in the summertime at 6, and in the wintertime you worked, or school years, you worked 12 to 8, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so you would not know of your own knowledge what would happen before 12 and what would happen after 8.
That's correct.
And unless for some reason you were asked to come in special because Mr. Broderick would be away for the weekends, you weren't there on the weekend.
Right. No, I wasn't.
You indicated there was a time when, when you worked, was there a time where any of the boys got in an automobile accident?
When Red got hit by the car?
Yes,
Is that what you're talking about?
yes.
Okay, but what's the question?
Okay, did you work there when Red got hit by a car?
I was filling in at that time.
And was there any, do you know whether Mrs. Broderick was contacted that day?
When Rhett got hit by the car, he was taken directly to the hospital, and police came to the house to pick me up and take me there. And they informed me that Rhett was fine and that he was calling his mother from the hospital.
Were you, was there any other car accidents when you were there during a period of time?
No, that was the only one I'm aware of.
You indicated there was a time that Elizabeth Broderick backed out of a visit. Do you remember that? Well, was there a time when there was a visit where she just didn't come pick the boys up?
Yes. I believe she had spoken to them about the fact that she wasn't coming.
And was there a and you also indicated there was do you remember a trip to Hawaii where your mother wouldn't take the boys?
Say that again, please.
Was there a trip to Hawaii that your mother had planned where she refused to take the boys?
That my mother had planned?
Their mother, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I was told by Rhett and Danny that they were going to Hawaii with their mother.
And was your understanding that your mother their mother backed out of that trip?
Yes.
Okay. I have no further questions.
Redirect?
Just briefly, Ms. David, when you were originally interviewed by an investigator from the DA's office, you told the investigator that Elizabeth Broderick had said on several occasions that she wanted to murder Dan, right?
Yes,
That was, you made the general statement that she had said that on more than one occasion.
more than one occasion.
And then in a follow-up interview, you were asked if you remembered any specifics of anything that she had said regarding wanting to murder Dan. Is that correct?
Yes,
And in that follow-up interview, you indicated that there was one particular conversation that really stood out in your mind,
Your
right?
Honor, objection, please. Sustained.
Was there one particular conversation in which she had talked about murdering Dan that really stood out in your mind?
the one I indicated.
And that was the one a couple of weeks before he was in fact killed, right?
Yes,
And you indicated that Elizabeth Broderick, when she did have conversations with you, she could talk rationally about things. Is that correct?
absolutely.
It wasn't as though she was crazy, wild, out of control, didn't know what she was doing.
No,
When she talked about Dan and Linda, she was simply angry. Is that right?
very, very angry, yes.
But there wasn't anything about those conversations that didn't make any sense to you, was there?
No,
Your objection, please. Overruled. Ask your stance.
Counsel asked you about something to do with whether or not you ever accused Elizabeth Broderick of trying to get you fired. Why don't you just explain to us what happened?
when I realized that Betty had opened that envelope and gone into those personal things, there was a restraining order that prevented Betty from coming on the property or into the house. And I was aware of that, but many times she would come in to pick up or drop the boys off, and it was perfectly peaceful. But when Dan found out about it, he would get really upset, and he would get really upset with me. So when I called to talk to her and I was angry, it was to explain to her that she was jeopardizing my position, not to accuse her of intentionally trying to get me fired.
You felt jeopardizing your position by violating the restraining order when you were there coming in.
Yes,
And you're referring to the time when she came in and ripped open the envelope that was on top of Linda's
wedding dress.
You indicated that you never felt that you were personally upset about her treatment of you, correct?
Correct.
Were you upset about her treatment of the children?
Sometimes, yes.
And did you ever express those concerns to her?
Yes.
There was a time apparently that you had a diamond stud in your nose?
Much to my regret. Yes, I had a diamond stud in my nose.
Was that something that she ever complained to you about?
I don't remember her being the least bit upset about it at all. In fact, she kind of made a joke about it when she saw it, but I wasn't aware that it upset her or made her feel like I was no longer capable of looking after her children.
Was it anything that concerned Dan Broderick?
No, Dan said it was a great place to keep diamonds if you didn't want to get them stolen.
And the incident when Rhett was hit by a car, I take it that was an accident, right?
Yes, it was. I mean, I know exactly what happened.
What happened?
And while he was riding his bike,
Objection unless she has personal knowledge.
She said she knows exactly what happened.
I was told by the police and by Rhett.
Go ahead.
Or still has objection. Personal knowledge.
It's not important, Your Honor. I'll withdraw the question. It was an accident when Rhett was riding his bike. Is that
Yes.
correct? And you were there at the house?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And Rhett was taken to the hospital. He wasn't seriously injured, right?
No.
And his mother was notified that very day while he was there at the hospital.
I believe that she wasn't home and her machine was on. And I do understand that Rhett left a message for her that was it was more dramatic and more upsetting than it needed to be. And she was upset when she called the house. But he was fine and she was contacted.
I have no further questions.
For the cross.
You remember that that there were some, that when when their mother tried to call the house,
Yes.
the answering machine was on? There was
Um,
problems her getting through
At that specific
at that
time?
specific time?
I believe the answering machine was on because nobody was home.
Okay. And the answering machine stayed on even after, he wasn't at the hospital very long, was he?
He was at the hospital, I recall, approximately an hour, start to finish.
Okay. And what time of the day did this happen?
It was in the evening, before dinner time, but in the evening, early evening.
Okay. And there was a problem. Did Elizabeth Broderick ever get through that evening?
Oh, yes.
Through a
She spoke to me.
Okay. And what time did she speak to you?
We came home, took Red up to his room. I think we were home about 15 or 20 minutes. The phone rang. The answering machine picked up because I forgot it was on, but I grabbed it and turned it off, and I spoke to Mrs. Broderick right then.
And you knew there was a restraining order in 1987, is that correct?
Yes,
And Mrs. Broderick was not supposed to come into Dan's house?
yes,
Was she doing that in 1987?
yes,
Was she jeopardizing your job in 1987?
yes.
Did you talk to her about it in 1987?
She was, no,
I have no further questions. Any further, Ms. Wells?
No, Your Honor.
Witness be excused.
No objection.
All right, thank you very much, ma'am. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take our afternoon recess at this time. Please remember the admonition not to discuss the case among yourselves nor allow anyone else to discuss it with you, nor form any opinions until it's finally submitted to you. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.
And could you please state your full name for the record and spell your last name?
Charlene Ellen Igo, I-G-O.
Thank you.
Ms. Igo, are you a police officer with the San Diego Police Department?
Yes, I am.
How long have you been a police officer?
7 years.
And do you work in any particular capacity at this time?
Currently, I'm assigned to property crimes, burglary investigation in the Western Division.
Are you a detective?
I am now, yes.
Directing your attention to November of 1986, what were you doing at that time?
I was assigned to uniform patrol in the North Park area of San Diego.
And when you say uniform patrol, that means driving around in an actual police car.
Yes, a marked patrol unit in uniform.
And were you working by yourself or with a partner at the time?
I was working with a partner.
On November the 1st, 1986, do you recall responding to the home of Mr. Daniel Broderick at 1041 Cypress?
Yes, I do.
What was the nature of the call, or why did you go there?
It was a disturbance call.
So the information that you had at that point was simply that there was a disturbance and you responded there.
Correct.
When you arrived at Mr. Broderick's house, did you determine what the nature of the disturbance was?
Yes, it was a violation of a restraining order.
And at the time, did you verify that there was in fact a restraining order?
Yes.
Did Mr. Broderick show you the restraining order?
Yes, and a copy of the proof of service that it had been served.
And, excuse me, was the restraining order one that restrained the defendant, Elizabeth Broderick, from being on the property?
From being within 100 yards of the property, yes.
Was Elizabeth Broderick there
Yes,
when you arrived?
yes.
And do you see Elizabeth Broderick in the courtroom today?
Yes, she's seated at the defendant's table in a beige suit, looks like.
May I have the record reflect, Your Honor, she's identified the defendant.
Record may so indicate.
Did you have contact with Mrs. Broderick that day?
Yes, she contacted me first.
And did you ask her whether or not she was aware of the restraining order?
Yes, I did.
What did she say?
She said she was aware of it and she had been served with the paper.
She was aware of being on the property was a violation of the restraining order?
Yes, and I explained that to her again.
And what happened then? What did you do?
At that point, she has the option of being released on a citation, or if I don't believe she's going to leave, I can take her to jail for a violation of the restraining order.
Did you ask her to leave the property given that there was a restraining order?
Yes,
And what was her response?
she said she would not leave. She said I'd have to take her to jail if I wanted her to go.
Did you explain to her that there was an option there of just giving her a citation and allowing her to leave?
Yes, several times.
And each time that you explained to her that option, what was her response?
She refused to leave.
And she told you that you would have to take her to jail.
Correct.
Did you ultimately arrest her and take her to jail?
I did.
Was that something that you particularly wanted to do?
No, it takes probably an extra hour and a half to take somebody to Las Colinas than it does to write a citation and let them go. So it took me out of service for quite a while.
And the only reason you did it was you basically had no other option.
That's correct.
I have no further questions.
Cross-examine.
Yes, ma'am. The conversation with Elizabeth Broderick was there. She told you that Mr. Broderick would not talk to her, didn't she?
That she wanted to talk to him. That's correct.
And he wouldn't talk to her.
Right.
She told you that that he was not. There was problems with money, and he had deducted money so that she had no money left, and she wanted some explanation.
I don't recall anything about money.
Okay. But there was a discussion that she was there because she wanted some answers from Mr. Broderick that she thought only he could give. Is that correct?
I understood that she wanted to talk to him, but I don't know the nature of what she wanted to talk to him about.
Now, after you told Mrs. Broderick you were going to arrest her, did she in fact say, okay, I don't want to go to jail?
That was after about the third or fourth time I asked her to leave on a citation, and then I told her I would have to take her into custody. And when we had the handcuffs on her, she said, okay, I'll leave, which the option time was over.
Okay. So at that point in time, when she realized that there was not going to be that she wasn't going to be able to remain there and talk to Mr. Broderick, she asked to be released from custody. And you told her,
No.
forget it. I have no further questions. Correct.
Did you know that she was represented by an attorney at that time?
No.
So you didn't talk about whether she had other options as far as talking to Mr. Broderick?
No.
I have no further questions.
Recross.
No,
Witness excuse.
No objection.
no.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Here we go.
People call Gail Forbes.
You do solemnly swear the testimony about to give and not enough before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Matt, could you please have a seat in the witness stand?
Witness Forbes.
And Matt, could you please state your full name for the record and spell your last name?
Gail Ann Tuck Forbes, Forbes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good morning, Ms. Forbes.
Good morning.
Can you tell us, do you know the defendant in this action, Elizabeth Broderick?
Yes, I do.
How is it that you know her?
I met Betty in October of I was pregnant with my first child, 73. Is that right? 73.
Are you married to Brian Forbes, who has already testified in this action?
Yes, I am.
And ultimately, at some point, were you essentially neighbors of Elizabeth Broderick, where she lived down the street from you?
Yes, we lived on Calle Corta when they rented the house on Avenida de las Ondas. And we lived on Calle del Oro, which is a corner house, when Betty lived on Calle del Cielo, which was at the end of the cul-de-sac of the corner.
And that's in the La Jolla Shores area of La Jolla.
Both of the houses are, yes.
Directing your attention to February 1st of 1986, the night of the Blackstone Ball. Do you remember that night?
Did you say February or November?
I'm sorry, November.
November 1st of 1986 is Blackstone Ball.
Yes.
Yes, I do remember.
Can you just describe briefly for us what the Blackstone Ball is?
The Blackstone Ball at that time was a social event given by the San Diego Bar Auxiliary, the women's organization. And it was given largely for the purposes of entertaining lawyers and their spouses.
It's a social event,
It was, it no longer is. It's now a fundraiser.
and is it a formal event? People
Yes,
get
it's
dressed
black tie.
up? And was that something that you knew that Elizabeth Broderick was aware of, the Blackstone Ball?
Yes, we worked on it one year as committee members together.
Do you recall any time that afternoon or evening receiving a phone call from Elizabeth Broderick from jail?
I assume she was in jail. I don't know what the booking procedures are, but the phone call I got was that she had been arrested and that she was at jail, and that she was calling me to tell me that.
Okay. Did you actually talk to her? on the
Yes.
phone? And did she tell you that she was in jail?
I believe that's what she said.
What did she tell? Did she ask you to do something?
She asked if I would call the newspapers and tell them that she was in jail while her husband was being celebrated at the Blackstone Ball.
Who did she want you to call? Anybody in particular?
She mentioned Burl Stiff, society columnist for the San Diego Union.
And that's who she wanted you to call to tell this.
Yes,
And how did she sound when she was telling you about this?
she was very excited. She was exultant. She was, this was going to work for her, even though she was in jail.
Did you ever have another conversation with Elizabeth Broderick about an incident where she was describing driving Dan Broderick off the road?
Yes, I did.
Can you tell us what she said about that incident?
Betty described to me an incident where she was in a rental car that would not have been recognizable by Dan or by his family members, her children, for instance. And I don't know where they were going or why, but Dan was in one car with the two boys and Betty was in the rental car. And they ended up, Betty ended up chasing Dan and I believe driving close to him or in some way trying to almost run him off the road in a way. That's the way it sounded to me, the way it was described.
And this was being described to you by Elizabeth Broderick.
Betty was telling me.
And how was she talking about it? How was she describing it? Was she proud of what she had done, ashamed of what she had done?
When Betty talked to me about it, she said she was glad she had frightened him. She was gloating about it almost.
Gloating about frightening Dan?
Yes.
Did she say anything about whether or not any of the children were in the car?
My understanding was that both Danny and Rhett were in the car and that they were crying. They were very frightened by what had happened.
Did Elizabeth Broderick ever talk to you about her abilities as a marksman, shooting?
Yes, she did.
What did she say about that?
She told me that in college she had been a sharpshooter and she'd earned medals.
Did she earn medals for sharpshooting?
That's correct.
Did she ever tell you about practicing shooting at a shooting range?
At a target gallery like?
Yes.
Mhm.
Did she describe how often she did that, anything like that? Or?
She didn't describe how often. She told me that she had been practicing target practice.
Did you ever have a specific conversation with Elizabeth Broderick where you were encouraging her to get custody of her children, get an attorney to get custody?
Yes, I did.
What was it that you said to her and how did she respond?
I suggested to her that if she wanted to be with her children, that she hire an attorney specifically for the purposes of regaining custody for her children.
And what did she respond?
And she said, No, I won't do that until I get my money.
Were you aware of when Dan and Linda Broderick were married in April of 1989?
I attended their wedding.
And sometime after the wedding, did Elizabeth Broderick say anything to you about their photographer or seeing the photographs of the wedding?
She had indicated, I think even before the wedding, that she was going to take a job as a photographer's assistant. And that seemed like a good thing for Betty to do because she has photography skills, I think. And then after the wedding, I learned that she was going to be employed by Mr. Campbell, who was the photographer at the Broderick's wedding.
When you say you learned that, who did you learn that from?
From Betty,
And what, did she say anything to you about the proofs from the wedding?
that she had seen the proofs before they did.
Did she tell you where she had seen the proofs?
I believe in the photographer's studio. I'm not sure. I don't recall her specifically saying where she'd seen them.
And how was she describing that? I mean, again, what was her attitude and demeanor?
She had an intense curiosity about the details of the wedding. And I suppose that seeing the photographs satisfied a lot of that curiosity. And
Do you know for sure, you're just indicating to us what she told you that she had done, is that correct? I mean, you don't have an independent knowledge of whether she actually saw the photographs.
no, I don't.
This is just, she described for you that she had seen them before they even got to see them.
That's correct.
And directing your attention to late October of 1989, shortly before Dan and Linda were killed, the week before they were killed, did you have a telephone conversation with Elizabeth Broderick where she was talking about them going to the Notre Dame game?
I had more than one conversation with her that week on the telephone. But yes, both conversations. In both of them, Betty mentioned the Notre Dame football weekend with USC.
And what did she say about that?
That she had been, that Linda and Dan went back there with the children, that friends and families that were Betty's friends and families were there, family members were there, and that Linda was basically living her life, that she's the one who should have been there, and that was her tradition, that those were things that were rightfully hers.
Did she mention anything at all about the fact that Dan and Linda had gone to that Notre Dame game before in years past?
I don't specifically recall it in that conversation.
How would you describe how she was talking about this? Was she angry?
She wasn't angry exactly, but envious, covetous. That's how she was describing it.
Have you described it as jealous before?
Jealous was, yeah,
Is that what you mean by covetous?
yes.
And then the Friday before Dan and Linda were killed, did you also have a conversation with Elizabeth Broderick?
Yes, I did.
And where was that conversation?
It was in our backyard by our driveway.
So that was a person-to-person, not a telephone conversation.
Yes, that's right.
And was she complaining about anything in particular at that time?
She was upset and angry. She had just come from her accountant, Betty told me, and the accountant had indicated to her that when all of her real estate transactions were complete, when all of her income tax and penalties were paid, and when she'd made whatever adjustments in her income were going to be necessary, she'd have about $60,000 or $80,000 left to live on for the rest of her life.
Now this, again, this was something that she was telling you. You don't have any independent knowledge of whether or not that was true.
No, I don't.
And you described her as being angry, correct?
Upset, angry, distraught.
Can you describe the extent? I mean, did you feel the necessity to do something at the time?
I had two children visiting me that were not my own children, and I know that Betty's language had deteriorated, and I was worried that her language and use of language in front of those children would be inappropriate, and I didn't investigate the conversation very much. I just let the conversation hang there in the air. I was probably sympathetic, but I didn't continue to extract information from her.
I have no further questions.
You indicated that you met Elizabeth Broderick in 1973,
That's correct.
and during the time that you knew Elizabeth Broderick, were your children around her very much?
You're not going to object to speak on this stuff.
Overall, you can answer that.
After my second son James was born in 1976, Betty and I became much closer friends. Her child Brett was born in February and mine was in January.
Was she the godparent of one of your children?
Yes, she is. She's the godmother of my child Bonnie.
And how old is Bonnie?
Bonnie's now 10.
So Bonnie was born in about 1981.
That's correct.
And you indicated you had some conversations with Elizabeth Broderick where she talked about a number of things about Dan and Linda.
Objection, Your Honor, that misstates the evidence.
Just rephrase it, Mr. Earl. When Elizabeth Broderick called you in November 1986, was that a collect call?
I don't remember it as being collect.
Okay, you don't remember an operator coming on and saying this is a collect call, do you?
I don't, but I may not have answered the phone either.
Okay. And you related a conversation that you had with Elizabeth Broderick that she had over the phone with you that day?
Yes.
Okay. Did you know that she had just received in the mail that day a letter that said that not only was she not getting any support, but she owed Dan Broderick?
Objection, Your Honor. Assumes facts, not evidence.
Stand.
But she talked to you about receiving a letter that day saying she wasn't going to get any support. And Dan Broderick said that she, in fact, owed him $1,300.
No, she didn't mention that in the telephone conversation.
So that was not something that she said the world should know, that Dan Broderick was not only not supporting her, but not even giving her any money, well, taking money from her.
I didn't understand your question.
She didn't say that's something she wanted the world to know, that Dan Broderick was not only not supporting her, but taking money from her.
She did not say that to me on the phone.
Do you remember when the conversation was about, when the conversation took place about the sharpshooting?
Actually, Betty has mentioned it to me more than once. I think the first time was when we were on the University of California at Berkeley campus. We passed a gymnasium in the basement of which there is a rifle range. And I mentioned it to her, and she told me at that time that she had done the same thing in college.
When was that? Do you remember approximately?
1970, in the 70s,
So sometimes in the
late
70s.
70s.
So the first time she mentioned to you was in the late 70s that she enjoyed, that was something that she enjoyed. She was a sharpshooter, she was good at it.
Right,
Okay, and she talked about it was, it was a sport that she liked.
that's correct.
And then you indicated some problem with Mrs. Broderick's language. That was a problem that had started fairly recently, in 1986 or so, 87.
It started after the separation. I would guess probably a year or so after their separation.
And did you remember a incident sometime where Elizabeth Broderick went to jail out of court for some period of time and you noticed a change in her language, demeanor? That there was a difference in Elizabeth Broderick after going to court one time and getting put in jail.
I remember being aware after one of her, of being in jail, of thinking that there were serious changes in Betty.
And the words that she used, for instance, the word cunt, that was a word that you had to tell her what that word was and what it meant.
That's right.
Okay. And do you remember when that came up? Was that before or after the separation where that came up?
It was after the separation, and
If you can remember the time, if you can't, that's okay.
it was in the wintertime. I would guess it was the winter of 85 and 86.
The
Could have been the winter of 84. 84, 85, or 85, 86. But I remember we were in our house that we currently occupy.
and during the period of time when she was living down the street from you, would your children visit with her often?
Your Honor, I'm going to check this down, so.
Sustained.
Well, you indicated there was some concern about Elizabeth Broderick in 1989. In 1987 and 88, your children were visiting Elizabeth Broderick's home, weren't they?
Objection, Your Honor, that's beyond the scope. She hasn't talked about her concerns about her children visiting Elizabeth Broderick.
Sustained.
Have you heard on that, Your Honor?
Well, you can call her as your witness at the end. Go ahead. I have no further questions. Your direction.
None, Your Honor.
You want to take her as your witness now out of order?
Your Honor, if we could approach that, Your Honor. We've got other witnesses we need to get on.
We just wants to ask one or two questions.
Oh, well, we can talk at sidebar about what those questions are. If it's just one or two questions.
Just more than
Yeah, I can just call her back then.
All right.
I don't mind if it's just a couple of questions. Let's hear what they are.
You should just hear what they were. Did she send her kids down there?
Oh, is that all you wanted to ask?
That's all I was gonna get into, yes.
Well, when he says get into it, I don't know if we're getting into something for an hour or.
Well, let's see. Do you want to call take her as your witness out of order right now?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Would your children visit Elizabeth Broderick's home?
Frequently.
Okay, and would that be by themselves as well as with you and
Yes, up to a certain point of time.
when was that point in time?
In May of 1988, I'd say that I started to have second thoughts about Betty's integrity, her completeness or her balance. And by January of 89, I'd say I was restricting my children from access to Betty's house.
I have no further questions. Cross-examine.
You were concerned about your children being around Elizabeth Broderick because of the things that she was doing and the things that she was saying.
Not completely. Part of it was her house had a trampoline set up and it wasn't being supervised. And it's an incredible, attractive nuisance. And I was worried about the safety of my children. And her pool was not fenced. And I didn't think that Betty was as watchful as she used to be about children.
Were you also concerned about the language that she used in front of the children?
I'm concerned about language in front of young children, yes.
Had you talked to her about not using that kind of language in front of your children or her children?
No, I didn't. I restricted the access that my children had when Betty and I were talking.
I have nothing further this time, Your Honor.
Witness excused.
Subject to recall.
Thank you very much, Ms. Forbes.
Thank you.
You solemnly swear the testimony about to give in the matter about before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. So could you please have us in the witness stand?
Morning, how are you? Good. Make yourself as comfortable as you can. If you want to fold that top down, you have a little more room for your papers. There you go.
And sir, could you please state your full name for the record and spell your last name?
First name is Orlando, Orlando. Last name is Padilla, P as in Paul, Adilla.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Padilla.
Morning.
How is it that you make your living?
I do security work.
And were you working in that capacity back in April of 1989?
Yes, I was.
In early April of 89, were you contacted by Daniel Broderick to provide security at his upcoming wedding because of fears he had about threats made by his ex-wife?
Your Honor, objection, leading.
Sustained.
In early of April of 1989, did you have a conversation with Daniel Broderick?
Yes, I did.
And what was the conversation?
Your Honor, objection. Relevant. Calls for hearsay.
Can we have a sidebar, Your Honor?
It's foundational. Go ahead. You can answer that.
I was contacted by Dan Broderick. I was referred to him by a client of his, and he asked me to come to his house to have a discussion in regards to providing protective services for him at his wedding.
Why was it that Mr. Broderick wanted to engage you in your services for his wedding?
Your Honor, objection.
It's overruled. You can answer that. Did he tell you why?
Yes, he did.
Go ahead.
He stated that his former wife had threatened to shoot him and his fiancee, Linda, at the wedding ceremony in front of all their guests.
Did he indicate whether or not he believed that threat was genuine?
Your Honor, objection. This is hearsay.
It's called for speculation. Sustained.
Did Mr. Broderick state that he was actually worried about the safety of himself, his guests, and his new wife?
Your Honor, objection. May we approach the bench? They know that they're asking for hearsay and leading questions, giving information, so I have to object.
Sustained. Just ask if he stated why he was hiring him.
Did Mr. Broderick state why he was hiring you?
Yes, he did.
What did he state?
He stated that he was hiring myself and my partner to protect him on his wedding day because of threats to his life and the life of his fiancee on the day of their marriage.
And what arrangements did you work out with Mr. Broderick for that wedding day?
I arranged for myself and a partner. Myself, I stayed at his residence the entire wedding day from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. My partner stayed at Mrs. Broderick's residence in La Jolla and followed her everywhere she went that day.
Mr. Broderick showed you a restraining order.
Yes, he did. He armed us both with copies of the restraining order.
Did he tell you anything else about other concerns he had based on prior activities of the defendant?
Yes, he
Your Honor,
took.
objection, hearsay.
Sustained.
I heard that.
Well, it's sustained on relevancy grounds. Other activities are not relevant to this incident. Go ahead.
Did Mr. Broderick tell you other reasons why he was especially concerned about his safety and his guest safety and Linda Broderick's safety on his wedding day?
Yes, he did.
What did he tell you?
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Overrule. Go ahead.
He stated he took me out to the front of his residence and showed me where Mrs. Broderick had driven into the front door of his house. and stated to me that she had threatened him over the phone several times. He stated to me that she had purchased a weapon and that she was known to have been practicing firing the weapon on a range in San Diego. He said that she was a very good shot, and
Your Honor, I just have an objection.
Sustained.
May we be heard, Your Honor, at sidebar?
I'll sustain your objection. Be heard to recess the sidebar if you want. Objection sustained.
I have no further questions.
Cross-examine.
Sir, did Mr. Broderick tell you that he had been purposely spreading rumors about Elizabeth Broderick for a period of time?
Beyond the scope and irrelevance.
What rules you can ask on that?
Did he tell you that he had been purposely spreading rumors about Elizabeth Broderick for 5 years to destroy her reputation?
no, he did not.
Did he tell you that
Same
sometimes?
objection, Your Honor. This is improper. Counsel knows it.
Well, assumes facts not in evidence sustained.
Well, Your Honor, he went into conversation. I'm trying to find out what the conversation is about.
Ask him.
Okay. Did he say anything about having Elizabeth Broderick very early?
Objection, Your Honor. You can ask the question, what else was said? He doesn't have to assume facts not in evidence.
On the cross, we're allowed to ask.
That's not
leading
correct, Your
questions.
Honor.
You're allowed to ask leading questions, Mr. Early, but they have to be based on facts and evidence. Go ahead. You can lead.
Yes, Your Honor, and I have information as to what I'm asking.
Well, go ahead.
Were you aware that Mr. Broderick tell you that very early on, he was telling people that
Assumes facts not in evidence. Object, Your
I
Honor.
haven't heard the question.
Do we have a sidebar so we can find out what this stuff is?
Let me hear the question. I can probably sort it out. Go ahead.
Did Mr. Broderick tell you that very early on in the proceedings, he was having Elizabeth Broderick searched at the courthouse when she would come in?
Objection. There is no evidence as to that.
Sustained, assumes facts not in evidence.
Did, all the knowledge you got was from Mr. Broderick, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. You did not attend all of the closed hearings, did you, in the courthouse?
No, I did not.
So you had no way of
Objection. He knows what this witness knows, what this witness has done. It's assuming facts not in evidence.
What rule this point? I'm going to hear the question first.
Did you independently verify by going to the courthouse to try to find out whether you could get any information from the closed files?
No, I did not.
Did you know whether there was any way that when things were being said about Mrs. Broderick, whether they could be verified?
Yes, I called a detective, and I can refer to my notes here, the day after I met with Dan, just to let him know what we were going to be doing that day. And he gave me minimal information that they were aware of the situation, and just came up with a plan to get in contact with them if she did break the 1,000-yard restraining order.
And you didn't do anything about trying to go to a divorce file at all?
No, sir.
I have no further questions.
Redirect.
Nothing, Your Honor.
Witness be excused.
Subject to recall.
Thank you very much, sir.
Your Honor, before we call our next witness, counsel indicated that you wanted to have some discussion before we call the next witness.
All right. So we're going to take our recess. How long do you think it'll take?
For our discussion, counsel,
Mr. Rose, give me a time frame.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, if I just ask you to step outside for approximately 5 minutes, I'll have my bailiff escort you. He'll bring you back up. Well, let's say 10 minutes. Sometimes attorneys aren't too good at estimates.
Your Honor, I don't even know if it'll take that long if you want to go back in the hallway. I mean, it's a very short matter.
Oh, all right. See, I don't know what we're talking about, folks, so that's going to take pleasure. Go to sidebar, Mr. Early. Because of my stenographer's equipment is all I'm thinking of.
We could, Your Honor.
All right, let's do the sidebar. You're welcome to stand up and stretch if you want.
Please state your full name for the record, and spell your last name.
Robin Tuua, TU''UA.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Ua.
Good morning.
At some point, were you hired as a housekeeper and babysitter of the Broderick children by Mr. Dan Broderick?
Yes, I was hired out of the governess agency. So I was hired as a governess, and my other duties were just to do like the grocery shopping and tend the children and help the boys with their homework, things of that nature.
You had duties that involved helping take care of the house as well as helping with the children.
Right.
And when was it that you worked for Mr. Broderick?
October 1986 through the summer of 1987, approximately July, late June,
And
July.
did you essentially work full-time? Was it a full-time job?
Yes, it was.
What were your hours?
Monday through Friday, noon to 8 p.m.
So when you'd arrive at the house, the children would be at school, is that correct?
That's right.
And about what time would they get home from school?
The boys would come home at 3:15 from the bus, would drop them off, and Kim would get home earlier than that. Then I'd go and pick up Lee at Bishop's school.
Okay. At that time, she was attending Bishop's, which was in La Jolla, is that correct?
That's right.
And when you worked for Mr. Broderick and the children, was that while he was living at the Cypress home in Marsden Hills?
Right.
Did you have the occasion to have contact with the defendant, Elizabeth Broderick, as well while you were working for Mr. Broderick?
Yes.
And basically, could you describe what your relationship was with her?
At first, it was really, when I first started working there, it was nice. She would call and she'd be pleasant, but that turned real fast. She was really rude. She used to tell me that I was lower than any Mexican she knew.
Objection, Your Honor. This is hearsay. This witness began.
So sorry, just answer the questions, ma'am. Don't volunteer anything, okay?
All right.
Go ahead.
At some point, you indicated that it started out very nice. At some point, then the relationship deteriorated?
Yes.
Okay. Were you aware of any messages that she would leave on the answering machine for the boys, for Mr. Broderick, for anybody in the home?
Yes, she would leave several messages on the machine.
Okay. And can you describe the nature of those messages that you heard?
Extremely vulgar, a lot of foul language.
Was that something that was particularly upsetting to you?
Yes, I was never raised with language like that.
Did you ever actually overhear some conversations between Elizabeth Broderick and her sons?
Yes, I would. I picked up the phone on some occasions when she would be speaking to her sons.
Did you ever specifically overhear a conversation that she had with her son, Rhett, that was very upsetting to Rhett?
Yes, I did. She told Rhett she wouldn't see Rhett if she didn't get the cunt out of the house, referring to Linda.
Okay, if who wouldn't get Linda out of the house?
If Rhett wouldn't get, I don't want to use that word again.
That's fine.
All right, she would, the stipulation is she wouldn't see Rhett unless Rhett would get Linda out of the house. He was completely distraught over that. He was very upset.
Was there something that he did after that particular conversation?
Yes, he did. He was so upset. He went upstairs and he locked himself in the bathroom. I thought he was using the restroom. He was too quiet for a while. I knocked on the door and asked him if he'd come out. But when he came out, he had scissors in his hand and he had taken chopped clumps of hair out of his head and saying he wanted to get the pain out of his head his mom put in his head.
I believe that's
Overruled.
spontaneous.
Overruled.
Did you tell Mr. Broderick about this incident? Was he aware of it?
Yes, he was aware of it. He was really upset. He came home and he just hugged Rhett, just held on to him and told him he loved him.
Did he do anything with respect to the phones after that?
Yes, he would turn down the ringers and turn the sound down on the machine, on the answering machine, just to protect the children. It's just insane.
Was there an incident that you had with Elizabeth Broderick when she said anything about having a gun in her possession?
Yes, she threatened to kill me.
Can you describe that incident?
Yes, I can. I was waiting for the boys to get home. About 3:15, the bus would drop them off. Danny came off the bus. Rhett was not there. I asked Danny where was Rhett, and he said he saw his mom taking Rhett from school. She had kidnapped him. He had not come home. She had
Your Honor,
taken him.
objection, speculation, hearsay.
Well,
No official knowledge.
sustained as to the word kidnapped.
Just describe what you saw, okay?
I was concerned. I went into the house, called Mr. Broderick. From the kitchen phone, you could see the driveway. You could see the road out front. I had the door propped open so I could see. I told him that Rhett was not here. Danny told me Mrs. Broderick had taken him. As I was talking to him, I saw her pull up onto the sidewalk. They're facing the wrong way. I told him that she had pulled up. He instructed me to call the police, and he also instructed me the whereabouts of the restraining order. I called the police immediately, went to his desk drawer, got the restraining order, went outside. Danny and Kim were with me. We went outside. I asked Rhett to please step out of the Suburban truck that she had. And Mrs. Broderick said, "You can't order my children around. You have no say. You can't control them." I again asked Rhett to get out. He did. He came by my side. And Mrs. Broderick said, "You can't control my children." She was just in a state, an outrageous state. And then Rhett looked over at me and he said, "My mommy has a butcher knife under the seat."
Your Honor,
When there's an objection, you have to stop. Okay. Sorry. What was the objection?
Your Honor, objection has been asked and answered. It also calls for hearsay.
It's overruled and asked to answer, and that's a hearsay. Overruled on that basis also. Go ahead, what did Rhett tell you?
He told me his mother had a butcher knife under the seat. At that point, Betty Broderick told me she had a gun in her glove box and she would kill me. At that point, there was not a shadow of a doubt in my mind that Mrs. Broderick would not kill me.
Where was she when she said this to you? Was she
On the
still in
sidewalk. She was out of her truck.
What did she do? Did she go back to the truck?
I turned around and ran in the house with the kids.
Did you have any more contact with her than that day after you went into the house?
She pulled away as the police pulled up. They had just missed her by 2 or 3 minutes.
Were there ever any occasions when you were working at Mr. Broderick's house and when you saw Elizabeth Broderick drive by in a car, for example?
Yes, there were a couple
Describe
times. Yes, I can. It was a little white car, and on the street on Cypress is just like a circle, so you can see every car that comes by. There's not a lot of traffic, and I would see a little white car come by, and I kept looking outside, and I recognized the driver as Mrs. Broderick.
What time of day would this occur?
It would vary. Mostly it was noon, right about when I got there. So there was nobody else in the house but me, unless there were some workers around, but it was basically I was alone.
So this was a time when the children would be at school.
That's right.
Approximately, during the time that you were working, approximately how many times did you see her drive by?
4, 5. Sometimes she had somebody in the car with her too. I noticed there was a man in the passenger seat. Sometimes she would just park in front of the house. I thought that's pretty bizarre.
When you indicated that you sometimes saw a man in the car with her, did you recognize the man or know who that was?
No.
And when you indicated sometimes she would park in front of the house, what would she do?
Just stare at the house. Just watch the house.
Okay. Did you ever do anything about that? Did you go out and talk to her or anything?
No, I never confronted her.
Was there ever a time while you were working where she just appeared in the house?
Yes, I was in the kitchen and I felt somebody behind me. The kitchen door was open and I turned around and she was standing right there. She was holding the dog.
She was holding what?
The dog.
Okay.
The little
The family dog?
the family, yeah, the kid's dog.
And what did she do? What did she say?
She told me that nobody ever takes care of this dog and it was abused, and which was not true. The boys loved the dog. It was well cared for. So she was holding it. And then she took the dog. She got in a car and left. She took the dog.
These incidents that you've just related, you just recently related those to me. Is that correct?
That's right.
When were part of your duties to, for example, cook dinner for the family?
Yes, I would cook dinner and then we'd all sit down as a family and eat. Over dinner, Mr. Broderick would
Your
ask.
Honor, objection. It's already been answered.
Sustained. That's another question.
Did you observe Mr. Broderick interacting with the children?
Yes, I did.
Did you ever observe any of the children to be afraid of Mr. Broderick?
No, never.
Did you observe how they would react, for example, when he would come home from work?
Yes, they were very excited. The boys would run out to the garage where he would park his car. There was a basketball hoop over the garage, and sometimes when he'd come home, they'd engage in a game of basketball.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examine.
What was the dates that you worked at the Broderick residence?
October 1986, late October, through the summer of 1987.
And what were your hours?
Monday through Friday, noon to 8 p.m.
And the times that you weren't home when the children left for school, you weren't at the house, were you?
No, I wasn't.
And you would leave after 8 o'clock?
I would leave. My ending hour was at 8. Sometimes I would stay longer. Sometimes I would leave early. It depended on if Mr. Broderick got home early or
Did you work on the weekends?
occasionally. Yes, occasionally.
Okay. And would that be when Mr. Broderick was out of town?
That's right.
And how many weekends did you work there?
Per month or the whole,
The time that you worked there, do you remember approximately?
approximately, it varied, maybe 1 to 2 weekends a month, sometimes not. It just varied depending on when he was out of town.
Now, it's your testimony that Mr. Broderick, the phones were not unplugged until Mr. Broderick told you to unplug them so the mother couldn't call the boys. Is that right?
Objection, that misstates the testimony.
Sustained, just rephrase it.
Well, you related an incident where Mr. Broderick told you to unplug the phones
Yes,
so the boys wouldn't hear them ringing. Is that right?
yes.
Were the phones unplugged before then?
Before,
Before that conversation? Or was Ms. Broderick allowed to call freely?
she called all the time.
So there was no time before that conversation where you remember the phones being unplugged?
Before Mr. Broderick asked me
Yeah.
to. At that time, for me, yeah, that was it. I don't know if he unplugged them when I wasn't there or not.
But while you were there from 10 to 8, from 12 to 8, we're talking about from lunchtime past dinner, were the phones ever unplugged up until the time that Mr. Broderick finally said unplug them because the mother's upsetting the boys?
Sometimes when I would get there, the phones would be unplugged. Sometimes he would ask me to unplug them. I'm not really sure what you're trying to ask me, Mr.
What I'm asking you is that you said that Mr. Broderick told you to unplug the phones. Remember that? Remember that testimony?
Yes, I do.
Before that time, think of that time, before then, were the phones ever unplugged?
That I saw?
That you saw?
Yes.
Okay, when would that be?
It would be, when I got there, the phones would be unplugged. When the girls would get home from school, that didn't last very long. They talked on the phone all the time.
Okay, and then when Mr. Broderick came, and then you would unplug the phone when you got home? You would unplug it again?
Not automatically, only if I was asked to.
So unless you were asked to, you didn't unplug the phone?
Right.
And would the phone be unplugged any other times during the day?
By who?
By anybody, other
No.
than the times when you got there?
No. You mean by the children?
By anybody?
By anybody? No.
And pretty much as your memory goes, the phones would be plugged in by the girls when they got home, and then the rest of the day they'd remain plugged in.
Yes.
The conversation that you had with Mr. Broderick about unplugging the phones, that was right after the incident with Rhett?
Yes.
Do you remember telling an investigator that it was after a number of calls from Betty that you finally had to sit down and ask Mr. Broderick to do something about the calls, and that's when he unplugged it?
That was another time. I asked him that I told him that I was not accustomed to listening to such vulgar language and to please talk to Mrs. Broderick about it. So I stopped answering the phone. I just, I didn't like hearing that sort of stuff.
Well, do you remember, there was an answering machine on the phone, wasn't there?
Yes, there was.
Okay. And you felt that you had to unplug the phone so you couldn't hear the answering machine, the voice on it? You know how to use the answering machine, don't you? You turn it down and people can leave a message,
That's right.
and then you don't have to hear it?
Yes.
But you unplugged the phone so you didn't have to hear it.
Sometimes.
Did unplugging the phone turn down the volume on the answering machine?
No, I would turn down the volume also sometimes.
Okay. And unplug the phone so you wouldn't hear the messages.
And unplug the phones. I would unplug the phones sometimes, or I would just turn the ringers down.
Do you remember telling the investigator that on several occasions you heard conversations where, from Elizabeth Broderick, where she would use the word cunt, and you finally had to talk to Dan about the phone, and Dan then told you to put the answering machine on and turn the phones down?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember talking to the district attorney investigator about that incident?
Yes.
Did you tell the district attorney's investigator that there was a phone call that precipitated that?
Yes.
Did you read the paragraph to yourself? This paragraph starting here and then go to the next page.
for the record what you're showing a
I'm
report.
showing a report, Your Honor, that's dated November 30th, 1989.
Just have a name who wrote the report.
Yes, I believe it was William Green.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Finish reading that paragraph.
Yes.
And you remember mentioning to Mr. Green,
About this paragraph?
do you remember mentioning to him that it was a phone call? Is that your testimony?
Yes.
And you remember talking to Mr. Green about it, that it was a phone call. Is that right, that precipitated that incident?
That's right.
The, you remember ever filing a declaration about that incident for court? Were you ever asked to file a declaration so the court would know about this?
I never did anything personally.
You indicated at the time Elizabeth Broderick came over had a gun in her car when she came over. The police were obviously called, weren't they?
Yes, I called them.
And they responded to that incident?
Yes, they did. They had just missed her.
You remember the last trial I've asked you, do you remember what the police officer looks like?
No, I don't remember what they look like.
Do you remember what his name was?
I don't remember what their names were.
Okay. Have you seen an incident report about that?
No, I have not seen.
Have you seen a police report?
No, I've never seen a police
Okay.
report.
Since the last trial, when you were asked about that, has anyone shown you a police report?
No,
Has anyone shown you an incident report about that?
nobody's shown me one.
Did you ask for a police report so you could review it?
No, I had no need to.
The, you didn't file a restraining order, did you?
No, I never filed a restraining order. There was already one on her.
Well, there wasn't one on staying away from you, was there?
No.
And it was a direct threat to your life, was there not?
Yes, there was.
The, were you the one that was responsible for, or at least the one who was informed as to how the visits would go between the mother and the children when she would be coming over to pick them up?
Mr. Broderick would let me know when she would come pick them up. He would call me and let me know.
Now, whether she was going to get to visit with the children on the weekend was decided that Friday, is that right?
I would learn about it that Friday. I had nothing to do with the parents decided, or the children. I was never part of deciding where the children would go.
Well, were you present during conversations where the children would be asking their mother to visit with them on the phone?
Yes, I would overhear some of those conversations.
And would you overhear conversations between the boys and their father about wanting to visit?
Yes, I would.
And was the response, "I'll let you know later," or was it always, "Okay, here's how we'll do it"?
That was, we'll talk about it.
Okay. And then Friday of that weekend, you would be told whether she was or was not going to be allowed to have a visit.
That's right.
Did the boys were they upset about wanting to visit their mother?
Were they upset
That they wanted to and they weren't being allowed to?
from if Mr. Broderick would say no?
Yes.
Sometimes.
Would they be upset during the week just because they didn't know if they were going to be able to visit their mother?
No, they were just uncertain.
You helped the boys with their homework?
Yes, I did.
Did the children have any special medical problems that you were aware of?
Objection, Your Honor, is all that can be done, so.
Well, overall, do you know if they had any special problems?
No, I don't know if they did or not.
No, the answer stands.
No allergies or no hay fever?
Nothing more than a common cold. If they were sick, they wouldn't have gone to school. I would have been called, and I was never called in.
But no chronic problem, like some kids have chronic running noses or hay fever, where they have to go to a doctor or asthma.
I
Nothing.
never took them to a doctor,
No.
other than the dentist or Dr. Sparta.
I have no further questions.
Redirect.
You don't know if any of the kids developed problems after you left working for Mr. Broderick, obviously.
That's right, I wouldn't know that.
And I take it that what you're indicating is you didn't know how the visitation was set up between the parents. You would simply be advised by Mr. Broderick on Friday what the plan was, because that's when you needed to know.
That's right.
Sometimes you would need to know whether the kids were coming home from school to be with Mr. Broderick or whether they're being picked up by Mrs. Broderick.
That's right.
And counsel asked you to read a paragraph in this report. He didn't ask you to read the previous paragraph. In the previous paragraph, you described the incident that you've testified here regarding the phone call that you overheard between Rhett and his mother.
Yeah,
Your Honor, Your Honor, they can read the paragraph, but that is an incorrect characterization.
Well, the way you do it, Ms. Wells, is you have to read it to herself and ask her what it says.
Okay.
Just read that paragraph to yourself,
You want
ma'am.
to read this paragraph here? And what were you describing in that paragraph? Which one do you read? Well, I don't know if that's a.
No, don't read it, just answer the question.
Is it the conversation with respect to, that you've already testified to,
yes, it's the conversation that Rhett had.
had with his mother, that precipitated the cutting the hair?
That's right.
I have no further questions.
Your thoughts?
You're saying that related to the next paragraph?
Your Honor, she didn't write the report.
I'm just asking.
Well, you're asking the wrong person, it's the same.
You indicated that was a common conversation she had with Rhett. Isn't that true, that you heard that a number of times, where she would say, I'm not gonna talk to you until the gun's gone?
Yes,
So that was not just one time, that was a number of times.
yes, this time seemed especially bad.
My first question.
Any further, Ms.
Oh,
Wells?
Your Honor.
Witness be excused.
No objection.
Mr. Ruler?
The 73 clock.
All right, thank you very much, ma'am. Very good.
For the Family Court Services as a mediator.
And what then would you be doing as a mediator for family court services?
Trying to help parents resolve for themselves what the arrangement would be with regard to custody and visitation of their children.
So you don't work as far as settling property disputes, you work regarding the children?
Only the children.
Okay. And was that something that you did full-time for that 10-year period of time for family court services, essentially?
Part of the time it was full-time, part of the time it was 3 days a week.
Okay. And then what did you do once you left that position?
I went into private practice.
And what do you do in private practice?
Primarily, 90% of my caseload is what I call extended mediation.
And what does that mean?
It's an elaboration of the family court services process. It is more in the nature of a full psychological evaluation. with regard to child custody and visitation disputes. The difference is at the end of my evaluation, I meet with the parents together for 2 hours and utilizing the information I've acquired as a result of testing, as a result of clinical interviews, try to help the parents decide for themselves what type of child sharing plan would be in the children's best interest.
You're basically still doing the same thing as far as trying to mediate custody disputes. You're doing it now in the private sector as opposed to working for the courts. Is that correct?
Yes, and in a more elongated fashion.
Okay. And is it when parents are going through a divorce or a custody dispute, must they go through some sort of mediation before they ultimately go through a trial?
Yes, as of January of 1981, based on a pilot program in San Diego County, 4607 of the Civil Code mandates mediation between the parents prior to any contested custody or visitation litigation.
Okay. So they have to either do it through family court services or they have the option of doing it through a private mediator such as yourself.
Yes.
Okay. And approximately how many cases have you been involved in attempting to mediate these sorts of things?
Upwards of 6,000.
Directing your attention to early 1987, were you asked in your capacity as a mediator to be involved in attempting to mediate the custody issues in the Broderick divorce?
Yes.
How was it that you were approached to do that?
I was approached by Tricia Smith, who was then the attorney for Mrs. Broderick, and for Gerald Barry, who was the attorney for Mr. Broderick, to try to assist them in private mediation with regard to the child custody issues in lieu of family court services.
And do you know why they were coming to you as opposed to family court services?
Your Honor, objection.
Sustained.
Did you have any information about whether or not the defendant was refusing to go through conciliation court, family court services?
Yes.
And what was that?
Your Honor, objection.
Well, do you have personal knowledge of why?
No, sir.
All right, sustained.
So the attorneys from both sides, essentially, the one representing Mr. Broderick, the one representing Mrs. Broderick, essentially came to you and asked you if you would do the mediation. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. That was an agreement between them.
A stipulate.
Objection, asked, answered.
Oh, overrule, the answer would stand.
And did you agree to do so?
Yes.
Can you just briefly describe for us, without going into too much detail, what your process is then when you decide to attempt to mediate a case?
I meet with each parent separately. I meet with each child old enough to be interviewed separately. I frequently meet with all the children and each parent in a separate session so I can see the family constellation. I may do psychological testing. And then I meet with the parents together for 2 hours to try to help them to resolve the issues that are in dispute.
Okay. Do you ultimately, if you work things out, do you ultimately write a report for the court?
Yes. I send a letter to both attorneys detailing specifically what the arrangements are going to be with regard to custody and visitation.
Okay. Now, directing your attention to March of 1987, did you have a meeting with the defendant, Elizabeth Broderick, in relation to this attempted mediation?
Yes.
And was that on March 3rd?
Yes.
Okay. Was this the first time that you had met with her?
Yes.
And this was, you were having a meeting with her first, and then you were going to have a meeting with Mr. Broderick, essentially?
That was the plan.
Okay. Can you describe for us what you informed Mrs. Broderick of at that first meeting? Did you explain to her what the process was?
Yes.
What did you tell her?
I told her that the format for the extended mediation basically, as I just told you, and I told her that my job, that I had the best part, that my job was to be an advocate for the children, that she and Mr. Broderick were adults and had attorneys representing them, and the children don't get an attorney. So even though I'm not an attorney, I'm the closest thing to an attorney that children have. And so I have the best part. And I was going to try to help Mrs. Broderick and Mr. Broderick decide on a rational child sharing plan so that the children would have as stable and normal an existence as possible.
So your position was not to take sides for either parent. Your position was to
Your
try
Honor,
and,
objection repeats every answer. That's just that true.
Sustained.
just attempting to clarify, Your Honor, but I'll move on. What was Mrs. Broderick's response when you described this procedure to her? What happened in the meeting?
She actually didn't respond to that part of it. She sort of started off with her own agenda.
And what do you mean by that?
She started to tell me what she wanted to tell me, I guess.
Okay, and what was it that she wanted to tell you?
She said that Dr. Stephen Sparta, who was then the therapist for the two younger children, Rhett and Danny, had said that she could not have visitation with them. And went on to say that she thought that Dr. Sparta was not fair. She believed him to be in Mr. Broderick's pocket.
And how did you respond to that?
Probably in a non-committal fashion. I don't actually remember. I probably would have said something like,
Your Honor, objection calls for speculation.
Well, sustained if she doesn't remember. If you don't remember,
not specifically.
that's fine.
Was she just so she appeared to be angry at Dr. Sparta because he had recommended something against visitation?
Yes.
Did she say anything about concerns that you were also in Dan Broderick's pocket?
Not at that moment, but I think later, yes.
Okay. Was there a time that you explained to her otherwise?
Yes, I told her that I didn't know Mr. Broderick at all, that I really hadn't even heard of him and knew that he was an attorney, but I didn't know him.
So you attempted to assure her that you were not being paid or in Mr. Broderick's pocket?
Yes, I probably told her that I had.
Your Honor, objection calls for speculation.
What's your best recollection of what you told her?
Your Honor, I still it's an objection unless she remembers.
I asked her what her best recollection was.
Overruled. What's your best recollection?
I told her that I had done mediation for a number of attorneys and judges and other people who were fairly prominent, and I didn't care if he was president of the bar or not. I still didn't know him, and it wouldn't have made a difference if I had, or something along that line.
What then happened in your discussions with her?
I tried to find out what Mrs. Broderick wanted from the process, what she was asking for.
Is that something that you normally do when you start off?
It's always what I do.
Okay.
This is a extended mediation or any kind of mediation. It's a very focused, short-term process. It's not therapy. The purpose is to get the parents to reach
Your
an
Honor,
agreement.
objection unresponsive.
Well, sustained. Just ask another question.
What is the purpose of your job there?
Your Honor, objection irrelevant. It's just going to statements.
No. Overruled. Can I ask that? What's the purpose of your job?
To try to help the parents to reach an agreement with regard to a child sharing plan.
Okay. And not to provide therapy for either one of them?
Not at all.
Okay. When you asked Mrs. Broderick then, what did she want out of the process? What did she respond?
She started to tell me why she was angry at Mr. Broderick and how she felt treated unfairly.
Okay. Was that something that you continued to discuss, or did you try to talk about something else, or what happened then?
I tried to talk about, I let her go for a little while, thinking that once she told me what she wanted to say, we could then get on to the child-centered issues.
Okay.
But I wasn't very successful.
Okay. What happened? What happened in the discussion?
She told me that there were rats in her house, that she made a statement that went along the lines of, let him see what 4 kids are about besides fucking.
Okay. What was that in relation to when she said, let him see what 4 kids are about besides that?
Well, at that point, I didn't know. Then she went on to tell me that he had the children,
Okay.
something that I didn't know.
Okay. And so did you ask her how it was that he got the children?
Yes.
And what did she say?
She told me that she had taken them to his house on Easter Sunday and dropped them and their stuff off so that he could see what it was like to raise them.
Okay. And that's when she made the statement about let him see what 4 kids is about besides
Yes.
fucking. Did she say anything else about that?
She said he has everything now.
If you're pausing, you're pausing because of the language that was used by Elizabeth Broderick?
Yes.
Okay. If you would, please, I would like you to give us the direct quote if you have the direct quote.
Quote, he has everything now and the cunt. End quote.
Was, how would you describe her demeanor when she was saying this?
She was angry.
Okay. Did you try to then get her to talk about what it was she wanted out of the process?
I don't recall at that point that I could break in because she went on.
Okay.
She went on to tell me that, do you want me to?
Go ahead.
She went on to tell me that she hadn't gotten her support yet and a bunch of other things having to do with the children. She was just very angry. And at that point, I let her run with it. Mm-hmm. I thought that if she got to say all the things that she wanted to say that I thought were pent up inside, then I could get to the agenda that I needed to deal with.
Okay.
And so I let her go.
Okay. And then what happened?
Toward the end, I told her that it seemed to me, more in an attempt to mollify her, that she had been the primary parent, that she had been what I call a stay-home mommy. And that it seemed to me that regardless of what happened, probably by the end of this mediation, she could get the kids back.
Okay. And what was her response to that?
She got even angrier.
Okay, what did she say?
She said, quote, I'm not going to be a single parent of 4 kids. He'll die first.
Okay. What, do you recall how you responded to that?
Probably said, what? And she went on.
And what did she say?
She said, the less I see them or hear from them, the better. No bother, no kids. End quote.
Did, how were you responding to this? Did you have any concerns about what she was saying?
I had concerns for a couple of reasons. The most immediate being that the law in the state of California that governs the license that I hold requires that I report a direct threat to the person being threatened. It's called the Tarasoff decision. And I sort of wanted to check out that I heard right, so I didn't do something that was presumptuous. And I asked her, I said, did you say that he'll die first? And she said, quote, you'll see, I'm not telling you. He's a cunt fucker. And I said, no, tell me her name. And she yelled, cunt. And that was sort of how the first session ended.
Okay. Now, you've brought along some notes with you. Were you taking notes when you had this interview with Mrs. Broderick?
Yes, I always take notes during custody mediations.
Okay. And if they make statements that you think are important, you write them down?
Yes.
Okay. When you say that you said to her, tell me her name, what were you referring to?
Mr. Broderick's then girlfriend.
Okay. And you were attempting to get Mrs. Broderick to just call her by name and talk about her as a person as opposed to...
I object. There's a place for the witness and a place for the attorney.
Sustained bleeding.
Your Honor, I would also object to the speaking objections of counsel. He can make the appropriate objection.
Your Honor, and she knows how to ask appropriate non-leading questions.
Both of you know how to ask questions. The objection sustained on the basis that it's leading. Rephrase the question and go ahead.
Thank you. When you tried to divert her from using that language, were you successful?
No,
Can you describe her, did her demeanor change at all during this meeting?
during the first session?
Yes. You indicated that she was angry. Was that consistent throughout?
Yes.
What happened? How did the meeting end? Why did the meeting end?
The time was up.
Okay. Had you made any headway as far as getting anything done in that meeting?
No.
Do you, I'm not sure if you said, and I apologize if I'm asking a repeated question, do you usually just have one meeting with mom, one meeting with dad, and then with the kids, or do you sometimes have more than one meeting with each parent?
I usually have one meeting with each parent, one meeting with each child, and so forth.
Okay. Did you just have one meeting with Elizabeth Broderick, or did you decide to do something else?
No, I had more meetings.
Okay. What happened?
I'm stubborn, and I wanted to see if I could make some headway. And so I had another meeting, I scheduled another meeting with Mrs. Broderick that was 2 hours long.
Okay. And was that on March 12th of 1987?
Yes,
Now, before you had that meeting, you indicated, you talked a little bit about the Tarasoff ruling and your obligation as a therapist to warn someone if someone else has made threats that you're aware of, correct?
yes,
Did you make that warning to Mr. Broderick?
yes,
Did you advise anyone else of the threat?
yes.
Who was that?
I called the police department, but they hung up on me. And then I called Mr. Barry, who was then Mr. Broderick's attorney.
Okay. So you advised Mr. Broderick as well as his attorney?
Yes, I sort of wanted someone else to know besides Mr. Broderick.
Now, can you describe for us what happened in the second meeting that you had with her?
Yes. I sort of made up my mind ahead of time that I was going to keep control of the situation, and I was going to do it in a very focused fashion so that it would stick to the issues. And I asked Mrs. Broderick to tell me a little history, to tell me what had happened and how this situation got to this point, because neither attorney had sent me any pleadings.
And when you're talking about how the situation had gotten to that point, you're talking about the custody situation. You wanted to know why the children were where they were,
Yes,
essentially?
I wanted to know when they separated. I wanted to know what led up to the children being with Mr. Broderick. I thought if I gave her a structure, a format, then we could keep it on track and get through the process.
Okay. Were you able to keep it on track and get through the process?
No,
What happened?
she responded by telling me that she lived in a house with rats and had no money. And then she went on to tell me that she had taken the children and their things to Mr. Broderick's house and left them there so he could raise them.
Okay. Did she make any other statement about what his response was when she had done that?
Yes.
What'd she say?
She said, quote, and you know what the cocksucker did? He kept them, end quote. I'm sorry, I'm not good with that language, Miss Wells.
Okay. And I apologize.
I think I'm blushing.
Okay. Was when she made that quote, do you know what he did? He kept them. How was she saying that?
She was angry. Angry and sort of, I guess angry covers it best. Angry and sort of, she sounded almost surprised.
Was that getting on track as far as you were concerned? Or did you, again, try to focus her on something?
Yes, I wanted to get back to the issues because this wasn't getting any place. And I told her that while I didn't know what Mr. Broderick's position would be, based on what she had told me, what I could glean from it, that she had been the primary parent, what I had said before.
Right.
And that we needed to work things out, and I wanted her to tell me what kind of plan she had in mind. Most people come into mediation with some kind of plan, whether rational or otherwise. They have some kind of an agenda as to what they want from the process.
And what did she indicate to you that she wanted from the process?
Well, she said, quote, "No way, I'm not going to be the single mother of 4 kids. I've already told you that. He'll die first. I'm not letting go of him that easy. The little fucker was mine and he'll stay mine," end quote.
And was she also angry when she was making these statements?
She was yelling.
How did you respond to her yelling this?
The yelling doesn't bother me. The statement bothered me, and I said something stupid like, "Are you threatening him?" I was more startled than anything else.
Okay. And what did she say when you asked her, "Are you threatening him?"
She said, I think she thought it was a dumb sentence too. She said, "I'll threaten the cocksucker. I threaten the cocksucker all the time. You know what else he does besides sucking?" I thought she said sucking, and that's what I wrote. And I repeated that. And she said, "Not sucking, she sucks, he fucks." At that point, I ran out of patience.
Did, when you say you ran out of patience, did you confront her about the language and say anything about knock it off?
Yes.
Okay.
Essentially what I said was, I may have even said knock it off. I said, "This is about the kids. Look, let's settle down. You're a grown-up and so am I. Tell me what you want from this process." Use her name and let's talk about what we're going to get done.
Okay. When you did that, what did she do? When you kind of tried to confront her about it?
She told me she didn't want me to take notes anymore. She said she wouldn't stay if I wrote anything else down.
Okay. So she was obviously aware that you were taking notes. You were doing that in front of her.
Yes, I had a legal-sized yellow pad and a pen in my lap, and I was writing.
Okay. And what happened when she told you she didn't want you to take notes anymore?
I stopped taking notes. I didn't want her to leave.
Okay. So you were still interested in continuing on and trying to do something?
Yes, I told you I'm stubborn.
Okay. What did you talk to her at all about, other people go through divorces, other people go through these kinds of things?
Your Honor, objection, leading, sustained.
Well, did you talk to her about anything else about other people dealing with these kinds of problems?
Yes, I was trying to calm her, and I said, I do mediation all the time. Divorce is a very painful thing. Very rarely is it done mutually. Lots of times people have affairs. Sometimes the affairs are even with somebody who's close to them, like somebody who works for them.
Objection is all irrelevant.
This is what she advised the defense.
Overrule. Go ahead.
Sometimes it's even a relative, and it hurts. It hurts a lot. But, you're lucky. You have children that are healthy, who love you. And let's get on with it. Let's figure out what we're going to do here.
Okay. This was in 1987, correct? March of 1987 that you had these meetings?
Yes.
Were you aware that she had been separated from Mr. Broderick since February of 1985?
No, neither lawyer had sent me any pleadings. I sort of started where I started.
Okay. When you talked to her about that, about essentially let's look at the positive, what was her response?
Her response appeared to be that she didn't want the kids back unless she could have everything back, unless she could continue to be Mrs. Daniel Broderick and have the family that she had before. The husband and the children and the house. She was just angry.
How did this particular meeting end, the second one?
Badly. I mean, I didn't accomplish anything.
Okay. Did, what was your intent at that point? Was your intent to go on or stop or what?
I thought that she would calm down. I thought that maybe this was venting that she needed to do, and I decided to try to keep on with it.
Did you have another meeting with Elizabeth Broderick?
Yes, a week later.
Before having that meeting, did you also have a meeting with Dan Broderick?
Yes,
And that was for purposes of this mediation?
yes.
You had never met him before?
I don't recall ever having heard his name before.
Can you tell us about your meeting with Dan Broderick? What was his attitude about mediating the custody dispute?
I don't have any notes from that meeting. And I can't exactly tell you why I don't have any notes, except at that point, I think, that if I wasn't going to take notes with Mrs. Broderick, I also wouldn't take notes with Mr. Broderick. So I can't tell you anything specific that he said.
Okay. Do you recall anything about his attitude?
Your Honor, objection, it's not irrelevant.
Overruled. Just answer if you didn't call his attitude.
Yes,
Can you describe it for us?
pleasant, cooperative, pleasant, mild-mannered.
Did it appear as though he was interested in attempting to resolve this dispute?
Your Honor, I have an objection. Your Honor, it's irrelevant.
I disagree.
Overruled is relevant. Overruled, you can answer that.
Not have you heard at sidebar, Your Honor? There was at least some ruling last time about what we can get into and what we can't, what releases there's been.
Well, no, overruled, you can answer what his, if he wanted to resolve the dispute on custody, just did he or didn't?
Yes, sir, he did.
Wanted something else as well.
Was he in any way throwing up roadblocks to you attempting to mediate this dispute?
Your Honor, I have an
Sustained. Wanted something else.
You indicated that you did have a third meeting with Mrs. Broderick, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And was that on March 19th?
Yes.
And did you take any notes?
I tried, but she wouldn't let me.
Okay. Do you recall essentially what occurred at that meeting?
Yes. She told me she'd always been a good mother, always been there, and had taken the children every place and done all the things that a mother who is not employed does with and for her children. And I believed her.
Okay. Did she indicate whether or not she wanted custody of the kids, or what happened, what ultimately happened in this meeting?
No, she didn't indicate that she wanted custody of the kids. The more she talked about it, and it started off fairly calmly, she got angrier and angrier and went over the things that she had said before. She felt, I think, that she had lost. And I tried to tell her that, see, I thought I was making progress. I tried to tell her that we could work things out, that I thought that she could have the children back. And at this point, I'd already talked to Mr. Broderick. And we needed to work out visitation.
Okay.
And what did she have in mind, if she got them back, that he could have her visitation?
And do you recall what her response was?
She didn't want him to have visitation.
Okay.
And she got very angry then.
Now you're looking at some notes. You indicated you didn't take any notes at the time. Did you jot down some notes after your meeting?
Yes. After the meeting was over, I wrote down some notes because at this point, I was apprehensive isn't the right word, but I thought that I had better keep a record of the session. So I wrote some notes afterward.
Now you indicated that she got angry in that session. It was similar to the anger that she'd had before.
Very similar to the anger that she had before.
Okay, can you describe the degree of her anger if you can? Can you qualify it?
Inordinate.
Okay.
She was very, 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 very angry.
Did you attempt to do anything when she was angry to get her off on another subject just to see how that worked?
Yes, I wanted to see if I could. She was wearing a gorgeous Diane Freeze dress. I recognize it. And I told her how pretty the dress was. And she told me that it's a good kind of dress to wear when when you gain too much weight. And since I fall in the same category, I was interested. And we talked about the dress a little bit. And she told me how much it cost. And she was charming.
Okay.
And
What was there any significance of that to you, that at the height of her anger that you could change the subject and she would talk charmingly?
yes, I, at this point, wanted to try to assess her psychological condition. And I wanted to see if the topic were something other than her divorce, if she could be rational. And she was rational and charming and very pleasant.
And what did that indicate to you, just about her feelings about the divorce?
That when she talked about her divorce,
No, I have an objection to this conclusion unless this is going to be an expert witness. I guess treated as such.
Sustained.
Was there anything about Elizabeth Broderick that suggested to you that she was irrational or psychotic or out of control, or was she just angry?
Your Honor, again, I object.
Sustained unless you're going to qualify her as an expert as well. She testified she didn't see her for therapy. Extraordinary. So excuse me, for custody counseling.
Well, how would you just describe her demeanor then?
most of the time she was enraged. She was furious.
Okay.
She was yelling.
What, did you get any feeling for whether or not Elizabeth Broderick was an intelligent woman?
Yes,
What was
she's a very intelligent woman.
any problems with her cognitively understanding what you were talking about, for example?
No, she is very intelligent, very perceptive.
Would you've indicated that you have obviously talked to a lot of people going through divorces. How was Elizabeth Broderick's demeanor compared to all of these other people?
No, this is irrelevant unless this is an expert witness.
Sustained.
Your Honor, I'd like to be heard on that. I think she can compare it to other people.
All other people in the same situation with child custody.
Yeah.
So they've got a foundation there.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's what I thought I was asking. In comparison to all of the people that you've dealt with at mediating child custody disputes, and obviously seeing different variations of anger, where would you put Elizabeth Broderick?
She may be the angriest person I ever saw. She's one of the top two anyway.
And when you made this tear-off warning to Mr. Broderick, was that something that you do as a matter? I mean, is that something that happens often?
No,
How many times in the course of your career have you made tear-off warnings?
in the last more than 15 years, I've made 3 to judges where people didn't like the ruling and threatened to harm the judge. And to one other person that I can remember now other than Mr. Broderick.
What happened at the end of this third meeting? I believe you indicated that you started talking about her dress. What happened right after that?
She got angry again, and I tried to turn her again, and I was able to do it. And she started to talk about the children, and then she got up abruptly, and she said, "I'm not coming back here." And I said, "What?" I thought I was making progress. I said, "What?" And she said, "I'm not coming back here. You're too good. You make me forget I'm angry at the little fucker and his cunt. I don't want those kids as a single." I'm sorry.
I'm not coming back here. You are too good.
You make me forget I'm angry at the little fucker and his cunt. I don't want those kids as a single mother. I won't let you talk me into it.
And then what happened?
She got up
And left?
and left. Fairly pleasantly. She wasn't angry then.
She was just making a very firm statement about her feelings.
Yes, she was, as I remember it, being pleasant.
Did you also, well, I take it that there was never any, well, excuse me, let me back up. Were there any other meetings with Elizabeth Broderick after this third one? For purposes of mediation?
No,
Okay. Did the mediation ever go through? Were you ever able to work out anything?
no, ma'am.
Okay. And you never ended up filing any sort of report or recommendation with the court?
No,
Did you start as a therapist, providing therapy for Danny Broderick?
yes,
And this was about the same period of time?
yes,
Okay. And was that at Mr. Broderick's request? Were you aware, I'm sorry, let me back up. Were you aware that Danny was living with Mr. Broderick at the time?
oh, yes,
Okay. And did Mr. Broderick contact you for purposes of giving therapy to Danny?
I don't remember if it was Mr. Broderick specifically or Mr. Barry. It could have been one and it could have been the other.
Okay. And for how long did you provide therapy for Danny?
Approximately 6 months.
And during the time that you were providing therapy for Danny, did you have contact with Dan Broderick, Mr. Broderick?
Yes,
Okay. Was he, can you indicate for us, was he concerned about his children?
Your Honor, you can't ask that question unless I am allowed to cross-examine by seeing all the notes, which I can deny.
Sustained.
Well, then I'd like to be heard at sidebar. I don't believe there's any privilege with respect to Mr. Broderick.
Do you want the notes for her interviews with Mr. Broderick turned over?
I don't believe she, well, we can talk at sidebar.
All right, come on up.
Can you just describe for us, please, Dr. Roth, what Dan Broderick's attitude was with respect to Danny and him receiving therapy and getting help?
he appeared to be concerned about his son's welfare and wanted him to have help, therapy.
Okay. And did he have contact with you? Did he discuss things with you regarding Danny?
Yes,
Was there one particular incident that you recall on an Easter vacation where it was your recommendation that Elizabeth Broderick not have visitation?
yes, after a consultation with Dr. Sparta.
Okay. Was this did you make that recommendation? Did you tell Mr. Broderick that you did not think the visitation should go through?
Yes,
Without telling us the specifics, can you just tell us what you were relying on?
I don't think so. Your Honor, I'm going to,
Let me, were you relying on information from Danny? I don't want to know the specifics. Was it information from Danny? Was it information from somebody else? Can you answer that question?
You're getting into privileged area, Ms. Wells. I'm a little uncomfortable with you asking these kinds of questions.
Okay.
I wasn't going to answer them anyway, Your Honor.
All right, you claim the privilege then?
Yes, sir.
All right.
On behalf of Danny.
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm going to ask for the notes so that I can see them. The district attorney knows that
I have no objection, Your Honor, to him having the notes. It's Dr. Roth.
Dr. Roth, do you have any notes on the Easter vacation incident?
No, sir, I don't.
Go ahead.
I have no further questions.
Cross the stand.
Ma'am, what's the name of the three judges that you do?
Objection, I think that's irrelevant.
Overruled.
Judge Kutzner, before she was Judge Sumwalt then, but now she's Judge Kutzner. Judge Pate. I have to think for a minute, Mr. Early, he's dead. The judge that was a friend of J. Edgar Hoover, and I can't remember his name.
I can probably help if that's permissible.
I didn't know J. Edgar.
And I can't remember because he had a,
Was it Judge Yoker?
no.
I can't help, sorry.
No, I'm sorry. He had a life-size picture of J. Edgar Hoover in his office, and I can't remember his name.
Can you just give me an approximate date? And we'll probably find that.
1979. Of that judge,
Yes.
he was sitting in Department 2 then in domestic. That's going to make me crazy, Mr. Early.
That's fine. And you gave one other warning to one other individual, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, what were the names of do you remember the names of the parties with Judge Kunstler?
You mean the name of the person?
Yeah.
No.
No, sustained.
Did you have any background, even though you didn't get any pleadings in the Broderick case, did you have any background whatsoever about that?
Maybe 3 sentences worth.
Okay. Did you know so you knew nothing about them at all, their history whatsoever?
No, sir, I didn't.
Okay. You knew Judge Ashworth at that time, didn't you?
He was an attorney, yes. I mean, before he was a judge, yes, sir.
Okay, but you knew at that time you were dealing with Mr. Gerald Berry, isn't that correct?
I was dealing with Mr. Berry, yes, sir.
And you knew that Mr. Berry was Mr. Ashworth's partner.
Yes.
And you knew Mr. Ashworth was now the head of the family law court in San Diego.
I don't think he was the head then.
Okay. You know when he became head?
Objection.
Sustained.
Okay. You knew Mr. Berry fairly well, did you not?
Not really. I know him.
Well, you know him as well. You mean you know him as well as any other attorney? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I know him as well as, there are many attorneys I know much better than Mr. Berry.
And the third session with Mrs. Broderick, did you grant her wishes and not take notes, or did you start out by trying to take notes?
I started out by trying to take notes.
Now, for some reason, Mr. Broderick, you thought that there should not take any notes at all. Is that correct? Because you hadn't taken any from Mrs. Broderick? Isn't that what you said?
Yes.
Okay. It had nothing to do with the fact that he was a prominent attorney that you decided that not to take notes of what he's saying. It's just you wanted to be fair to Mrs. Broderick. Is that what your testimony is?
Not exactly. Quite frankly,
You indicate you take notes at every single session.
Yes.
That's your habit.
that's right.
But for some reason, you broke the habit with Mr. Broderick. Is that correct?
Yes.
Have you ever broke it with anyone else?
No.
Have you ever said to anyone else, sir, do you want notes taken or do you just take them?
I never ask anybody. I just do it.
Okay. And that's what you did with Mrs. Broderick. Every chance you got, you tried to take notes, didn't you? You did the first section, the second session till she stopped, and you did it the third session. Isn't that right?
It wasn't every chance I got. I do it routinely.
No, do you do it routinely, or is it Mr. Broderick was different than every other person, wasn't he?
They were both different from every other person.
Mr. Broderick is the only person you're telling me in your career where you didn't even try to take a note. Isn't that right?
I suppose so.
And Mr. Broderick, after those sessions, you remained on Mr. Broderick's payroll. He paid you after that for therapy. Isn't that right?
That's right, Mr. Early.
And you got into a fee dispute with Mrs. Broderick and sued her for money, did you not?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay, and that was a suit that you had that you lost, isn't that right?
That's right.
Okay, and when Mrs. Broderick came in,
at that time, you had received a letter indicating that Mr. Broderick, or at least there was some argument whether Mr. Broderick was going to pay for this or whether Mrs. Broderick was going to pay for half. Isn't that correct?
No, the letter came later.
Well, at some point in time, you got a letter indicating that that it was the understanding that Mr. Broderick, did you get one from Tricia Smith about Mr. Broderick paying for all of the therapy?
No,
Now, when Mrs. Broderick came in, you indicated that right away she went into the subject explaining how she felt about Mr. Broderick. Is that correct?
yes,
And she talked about being a single mother and about her feelings about Mr. Dan Broderick. Isn't that correct?
yes,
And when she explained these feelings, did she tell you when she was explaining how she felt, why she didn't want to have the children at that point? Did she explain that she didn't trust Mr. Broderick? Was she telling you that?
I don't think she said she didn't trust him.
Okay. Was she telling you at all that Mr. Broderick uses money as a weapon?
I don't know that she put it that way, but she may have.
And did she also tell you that she felt that as soon as Mr. Broderick had the children, that there would be problems in paying for their education, for their child support?
No,
Talk to you about that at all?
no, she didn't.
Okay. No mention at all about the fact that that she wanted to settle the matter first, make sure that she had an independent life without Mr. Broderick having the money?
No, she didn't say that.
She tell you at all that Mr. Broderick had, that she was concerned because Mr. Broderick owned all the assets and she didn't have any?
Objection, I missed this.
I'm asking if she didn't mention that.
Overall, you can answer that.
Did she mention that at all?
Say it again, please, Mr. Early.
Did she mention at all that Mr. Broderick had the assets and that he wouldn't settle the divorce case? And that she thought he was dragging his feet?
No, she said she wasn't getting any support.
Was there any question at all about, were there complaints at all about lack of discovery from Mr. Broderick and he was dragging her feet? Was that brought up at all?
No,
The, Mr. Broderick, you indicated that you called Mr. Berry in regards to Mr. Broderick after you warned Mr. Broderick. Was that because Mr. Broderick didn't show any concern?
no, it's because the police department hung up on me.
Well, you then said you called Mr. Broderick.
No, first I called Mr. Broderick.
Okay, and did Mr. Broderick say that's what she always says?
Yes, sir, he did.
Okay, and then you called the police,
Yes, sir,
and then you called Mr. Berry,
yes.
and did you write a letter about having trouble getting a hold of Mr. Broderick, needing another phone number?
A lot later, yes.
Okay. So there was at some point in time where you weren't able to get through to a private number where you could get a hold of Mr. Broderick, is that right? Or your calls weren't getting returned?
Which, do you want me to answer one or both?
Well, answer, one or both, whatever.
I'm going to,
I mean,
Tom had a question.
Okay. Was there a time where you had some problems getting some calls returned?
there was a time, yes.
And was there a time where you didn't have a number where you could reach Mr. Broderick?
The answer would have to be yes.
And was there a time where there was enough that you wrote a letter asking for at least asking for help in that, to make sure that there was some place where you would be able to have some communication where it was guaranteed communication?
I can't answer that yes or no, Mr. Early. I wrote a letter, but not for that reason.
Okay. Did the letter contain some facts about problems getting a hold of Mr. Broderick?
Yes,
Now, you indicated that there was something about Easter that you were involved in. Do you remember what day of the week was that? Was that a Friday?
I don't remember, Mr. Early.
Do you remember anything, whether it was the last day of school before Easter?
I'm going to have to tell you that I don't remember. It was 4.5 years ago.
You talked to Dr. Sparta,
I remember talking to Dr. Sparta, yes.
and Danny had been treated with Dr. Sparta before he came to you.
Yes.
Did you talk to her at all about the sale of her home or about being in a hospital?
Excuse me?
Did you talk to her at all about the sale of her home or being put in a hospital?
She mentioned something to me about the sale of a home, but I didn't know she was in the hospital.
The Now, you described her conversation about her being when she was raising the children, about she felt that she had worked hard, belonged to PTA organizations.
Yes, sir.
And she also raised concerns about the boys being beat up by their father.
She mentioned that. I'm sorry?
Hit by the father.
I think she said, I don't think she said hit. She didn't say hit.
Kicked or beat.
Yes, she said that.
You didn't do any psychological testing on Elizabeth Broderick?
Oh, no.
And did you receive any psychological tests?
No.
Is that something you normally do, normally don't do, sometimes you do?
Sometimes I do.
And did you receive any on Mr. Broderick?
None.
And did you do any on Mr. Broderick?
No.
Do you do psychological testing yourself?
I do MMPIs. Anything further, full batteries, I send out.
Okay. Now, when you told Mrs. Broderick about the process, you let her know that everything she told you was going to be passed along to Mr. Broderick, didn't you? You told her that this was an open, whatever you say here, both sides get to know.
No. I mean, I didn't say that, no.
Well, you tell them that whatever she tells you, you report back to the prospective attorneys, don't you?
No. If there is an agreement, all the attorneys get is the agreement. If there is no agreement, then I write a full report, just as would happen in a full psychological evaluation, a custody evaluation. Everything else is kept. If they'd reached an agreement, no one would have known anything, except the terms of the agreement.
Well, except if there's no agreements, don't you report back you tell her the conversations she's having with you are not confidential? Don't you tell her that?
Wait, I'm sorry, ask it again.
Well, when she came in, Elizabeth Broderick came in and you were talking to her, did you let her know that you were not on either side and that basically the conversation is not confidential?
I don't say those words. I said the first part of I say that I'm not on either side, that my job is to be an advocate for the children. I doubt that I specifically said this is not confidential because the attorneys tell people that. That's part of the process. Most attorneys prep their clients very thoroughly for coming in to see me.
Well, last time you testified, when I asked you the conversation is not confidential, you answered yes, didn't you? You told her that? It's one of the things you told her?
I don't recall saying that it was or wasn't confidential.
Yeah. Page 702 of the 29. 15 through 20, if you could read that to yourself.
Yes, sir. Got it.
Was that one of the things that were asked, that you told her that it was not confidential?
She didn't ask me. What I said was a report would be made to the attorneys. It was the word confidential that threw me.
Oh, okay. So you let her know in basic terms that what is being said, what goes on there, that's gonna go to the attorneys.
If they reach an agreement, the terms of the agreement go to the attorneys. If there is no agreement, then a full report is made.
Okay.
It was the word confidential that
Okay. So at that point, if there's no agreement, there's a full report made?
yes,
And did you make a full report?
no,
The, and it was your feeling that she was not somebody who needed therapy?
Objection, how would she ever testify to that?
Sustained.
Well, do you remember when you're going through this session with her, thinking to yourself, this woman needs therapy?
I remember thinking that, yes.
Remember, last year, you remember last year saying that you don't remember ever thinking that?
No, I don't remember saying it. If I said that, I must have been in a very benign frame of mind. I mean, I don't remember having said that she doesn't need therapy.
Remember saying you don't remember thinking that whenever you were asked, did you think that she needed therapy?
At any point throughout the process?
Page 703, line 7 through 11. You read 7.
I read it.
Do you feel that that's not an accurate reflection of what you were feeling?
That which isn't an accurate reflection.
Well,
That I think so or that I don't think so.
what is it? Do you remember thinking that she needed therapy?
I don't know if I thought it then or if I'm thinking it now. See, I can't unscramble it in my head from what I thought 4.5 years ago to what I'm thinking now. So I don't know how to answer the question.
Okay. And I take it that when you're trying to think about things now, you're also thinking about all the things you've learned about this case since then.
Actually, I'm not. I'm remembering what happened back then. And trying to get through this process.
You remember her asking some conversation about splitting the kids because she felt that there was some problems emotionally with having all 4, with the divorce not being settled?
No, I don't.
Remember her having a conversation at all about splitting the children?
I can't remember that.
That's something that she could have asked? Or is that something you would not, that would be something you would?
Objection calls for speculation. She's answering the question.
Sustained.
Your Honor, I'd like to show her something, so can I at least do a foundation?
Sure.
Okay. Is that something that that you know she definitely didn't say because you don't remember it?
That's exactly it. I can't tell you that she didn't say it or that she did say it. I don't remember hearing it.
Did she talk to you about Dr. Nelson?
She may have mentioned Dr. Nelson's name. I quite frankly don't recall.
I could show you page 704, lines 19 through 20.
She may have, as I said, she may have mentioned it.
Well, last year you said she mentioned his name briefly, didn't you? You didn't say she may have, you said she mentioned his name briefly.
Okay.
Well, Ms. Brody can't teach on a relevant matter like that. Go on to something else.
Your Honor, I'm trying to test her recollection, as to that conversation. It's 4.5 years later, I think I have a right to do that.
We have the right to do it. Whether she may have mentioned Dr. Nelson's name briefly or not is really irrelevant to these proceedings. Go on to something else.
Well, Dr. Nelson is a child psychiatrist, isn't he?
Yes, very well known.
And she discussed with you fears about the process and about the outcome being ordained.
Yes,
This case was also unusual in that there was no fee agreement, is that correct?
with whom? With me?
Yes, there was no fee agreement in this case, was there? Agreed upon beforehand.
You're right. There wasn't.
And that's very unusual for you, isn't it?
Practically unheard of.
And that was because of Mrs. Broderick?
No, I don't know why it was. I always establish that, I try to establish that kind of, well, no, not try. I always establish that kind of thing ahead of time. I don't know why there wasn't.
And when, after the fee disagreement with, in regards to Mrs. Broderick, someone did pay your fees, didn't they?
Yes and no. Well,
Did they get paid from another source?
no.
I have no further questions.
How long are you going to be on redirect?
Not very long.
Go ahead.
Counsel's suggesting, Dr. Roth, that you're perjuring yourself here because you were on Dan Broderick's payroll. Is that true?
Your Honor, that is argumentative, and I would like to court it.
Sustained.
Well, he asked you about being on Dan Broderick's payroll, right? Are you on Dan Broderick's payroll, and is that why you're testifying the way you are?
No.
You feel some need to come in here and perjure yourself on behalf of Dan Broderick?
I don't feel a need to come in here at all. No.
Is your testimony biased in some way because you have some obligation to Dan Broderick or the powers that be?
As well as I didn't even know Dan Broderick. No, the answer is no, I'm sorry.
You indicated that you took notes as the conversations were occurring with Elizabeth Broderick, correct?
Well, part of the time.
Right. And those were part of your file, and that file with respect to that mediation has been turned over for discovery, correct?
To both of you, yes.
Nothing being hidden there against anybody, correct?
No, absolutely not.
And do you recall at this point why it was that you didn't take notes when you talked to Dan Broderick?
I'm trying to remember since it first came up today, and I honestly can't remember. It had nothing to do with Dan Broderick. I just can't remember. I think I think I was beginning to think the whole thing was hopeless and that it wasn't going to go anyplace. But I don't know.
You indicated that by the time you talked to Dan, you'd already had 2 meetings with Elizabeth Broderick that were fairly unsuccessful, correct?
Yes.
Or was there some suggestion that somebody call you up and say, hey, you're gonna talk to Dan Broderick, so you better not take notes?
No, of course not.
If Mrs. Broderick said something to you about not trusting Dan Broderick, do you have any idea why she wouldn't want to take the kids then? Does that make any sense?
I didn't know why she didn't want to take the kids.
If she was truly believing that Dan Broderick was beating and kicking her kids, do you have any idea why she wouldn't want to take them then?
Your Honor, object.
Overrule, this proper redirect, you brought that up. Go ahead.
Well, I understand I brought it up, Your Honor, but redirect still means that you don't ask any questions.
Well, she has to focus her in the area. Go ahead, that's a proper question. Go ahead, you can answer that.
No, I have no idea. I had no idea why she wouldn't try to keep it the same tense. No, I had no idea why she wouldn't take the kids.
That sounds a little inconsistent, doesn't it? For her to say, you're not gonna talk me into taking these kids, when she's claiming that Dan Broderick is beating them up.
Your Honor, objection. It's testifying and then there's a yes and no answer. That's legal.
Sustained, that's argumentative.
Was there any indication whatsoever from Danny Broderick that Dan Broderick beat him?
Your Honor,
Is this a privilege area?
I think so, Your Honor.
All right, do you find the privilege?
Yes, sir, I did.
All right.
On behalf of Danny, you're claiming the privilege?
Yes, on behalf of Danny, I'm claiming the privilege.
But actually, you assert the privilege.
I'm sorry, right.
That's okay, for the record, clear. Go ahead.
You indicated that you wrote a letter to Dan Broderick. Counsel asked you about writing a letter to him regarding having some concerns getting in touch with him.
Yes.
I don't know what he's talking about, so I'm asking you, what was that letter about?
I wanted to give him a tear-off warning. And I wasn't in San Diego. Your Honor, I don't know what to do. I don't know whether to answer or not to answer.
No, you can answer that, go ahead.
So, okay.
It was brought up, go ahead.
I wanted to give him a tear-off warning, and I wasn't in San Diego. I'd been contacted out of town, and I was using payphones. And I wrote the letter to sort of cover my malpractice. I wanted to have some formal record that I had contacted him. And that's why I wrote the letter.
Okay. Was there, you indicated that there was some problem with getting in touch with Dan Broderick?
I couldn't get through.
When you were calling on the payphones that
Yes.
you're talking about? When you were involved with treating Danny, did you have any problems getting in touch with Dan Broderick or him getting in touch with you and dealing with whatever needed to be dealt with?
No, this was the only time. And the letter was written to cover my back, sort of.
You indicated that when you told Mr. Broderick about the threats that the defendant were making, that he indicated to you that he was aware that she had been making threats. Is that correct?
Yes, he was very non-committal. It's like, oh, okay,
Okay. You'd heard them before?
that's exactly what he said.
And Elizabeth Broderick, in fact, had told you she'd been threatening him for quite some time, right? She said, I threaten the you-know-what all the time.
Yes. I didn't,
And when she indicated to you that she wasn't getting any support, were you aware of the time that she had a court-ordered support since December of '86 for $16,000 a month? Did she tell you anything about that?
no, she didn't.
Did she tell you anything about the money that she was actually receiving?
No. I don't get into money. I only do, I mean, I'm not interested in their money.
I have no further questions.
Recross? What is basically is.
Secretary Call, Your Honor.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
It's been a pleasure.